Okay, oops, hold on. Let me see if this is working. All right, so I believe we are live. One can never be too certain about these things until one gets confirmation from someone in the Ethernets out there. But I believe that this is live. And welcome to the second session of Brownapalooza, the 100th episode, Consciousness Live. Spectacular extravaganza. I forgot my own thing that I wrote, but anyway, welcome to it, and here we are. Joining me, extra special guests Jake and Claudia. Thank you very much for joining me today, guys.
Thanks for having us.
Okay, hold on. Let me just make sure that we are indeed live. Otherwise, I'll have to say
you want
all
to
of that.
want me to ask someone if you're alive?
Yeah, okay, let me check. Just double check here. It says that we are, so I'm going to trust the internets and go ahead and transition into this. This is, I just want to say a little bit about the book before we get into discussing it. So I want to thank you guys for joining me. And I am very interested in hearing what you guys have to say. So I wrote the book to try to get some of these ideas out for more general discussion. So I'm very happy that we have this opportunity to have this discussion. I want to thank you in advance for that. I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage because I'm not exactly sure what you guys are going to say. So I'm going to guess a little bit and talk a little bit about some of the themes that may come up. So now, the first thing that I kind of want to say is that I wrote the book from the perspective of someone who's very interested in the science of consciousness and also has a kind of an interest as well in higher order theories, but I don't really think of myself as someone who really believes that higher order theories are true. I think that they are an interesting empirical conjecture about the nature of consciousness and that they should be taken as seriously as other empirical conjectures like global workspace theory, IIT, if that's a respectable one. I tend to think that it is, etc. So I want to put it on the table, not as something that I want to say, I think this is true and you should believe me, but rather as an interesting idea that can also help us to try to figure out whether the science of consciousness at its current stage can make serious progress on some of these issues. So the higher order theories seem to me to be a good test case for the science of consciousness. Now, thinking of these things in this way has led me to believe that the traditional way of setting up this landscape of higher order theories involving what's known as the transitivity principle, an awareness that conscious state is one that I am conscious of myself as being in. I've come to view that as a kind of not wrong, but delineating only one subset of the possible space of higher order theories. And that doesn't mean that it's uninteresting or that I don't like it. It's just that I don't think it's the only way to approach these issues. So I've tried to explore an alternative way of thinking about these things that rejects the idea that there are unconscious states which then become conscious as a result of my being aware of those states. And this is what I call the non-traditional, non-relational higher order approach that says that a phenomenally conscious state just is a certain kind of higher order representation to the effect that one is having a mental life. So it is a kind of higher order theory in that it involves inner awareness as an important part of the account of phenomenal consciousness, but it's a non-traditional way of thinking about this, given that it does not start from the idea of the transitivity principle. So that nonetheless, it shares many similarities and also some differences with these other sorts of views. So that's where I start off by saying that this, if you were looking for this kind of thing in the brain, you would want to find a neural correlate for this kind of higher order representation, not for the states which it represents you as being in. So that's one set of issues that I think are going to come up in this discussion, or issues about the transitivity principle and the kind of traditional, what I call the traditional higher order approach, and can you make sense of inner awareness, and why accept a theory of consciousness independently of these considerations. So I think that's going to be one central concern. On the other hand, I think that a central concern is going to be my reliance on the notion of concepts and intentional content, and whether the kind of higher representations are sophisticated in the sense that they kind of go beyond the abilities of simple animals, infants, and other less cognitively adept organisms than full-grown humans. Whether such creatures could have the kind of states that the horror theory postulates as in its explanation. And so I want to say at least that there's the empirical possibility that the answer is yes, and that infants can have these kind of states, and same with animals. And maybe even, I would go so far as to say we're not really sure what the right biological, neurochemical conditions would result in the kind of higher order states that we're interested in. So we're in the process of trying to figure out where in the brain to look and what kind of activity would count. But I don't think that we can say with any great certainty. Instead, what we have are a bunch of different candidates for implementing these ideas in the neural setting, and then we want to kind of go through and test each one. And so therefore, I don't think that the prefrontal cortex is necessarily associated with higher order theories. It's an interesting place to look, and it is a possibility, but I don't think that if we didn't find something there, that would somehow falsify higher order theories. So I think there's a lot of stuff regarding infants and their development of their brain, and whether they can have these kinds of states that are going to come up, and which part of the brains may be relevant. So those are the kind of general themes, general issues. I'm sure many other things will come up, but having said that, I'll turn it over to Claudia for some comments.
Okay, thank you very much, Richard. And I think in your introduction you touched, although you don't know what I will ask to you. I think maybe you touch on most of the points I have. So I want to talk about if the version you have of oral is falsifiable, and issues about developmental consequences of the approach, but also other. I have maybe one question that was not in the introduction you gave. Okay, so I just want to start with like kind of a general remarkers of what I liked in the book, given the fact that I will press you in many points. So I start with some more complimentary remarks, because I really enjoy reading the book. I think it's a rich, very carefully argued book. And I think the book asks all the right questions. Maybe I disagree with the answers, so I'll press you more in the answers than in the question, but I think the book is the landscape of questions that the book has, I think, is really relevant for the science of consciousness. And I think it's like whatever someone thinks about the oral theories, I think one very nice contribution of the book is kind of reframing the entire landscape of consciousness science, less about specific theories and more about first order and high order approaches. So I think this is a nice a feature of the book. Okay, so it's I think it's kind of like, for me, one very big contribution for the science of consciousness. So seeing so we haven't been discussed how many theories the science of consciousness has. So Anil Seth and Tim Bain has that nice paper with all the 20 plus theories of consciousness. And I think given the variety of theories, sometimes it's hard to assess the field if you don't have a more framework that might help select the theories in a different way. So I think it's a nice feature of the book, the contrast between first order theories and high order theories. Okay, although I'll press you later in a consequence of this frame.
Well,
okay?
actually, that's all the time we have for today. With all those compliments, I'm just kidding. Sorry, go ahead.
Yeah. I think also the book does two things at once. Okay, it develops a specific theory, raw, high order representation, over-representation. And I think this is a theory you have been refining for the past decades. So I think this is a very important feature of the book, but also ask a kind of theoretical claim, or I don't know, maybe some meta-theoretical claim that is these distinctions between higher order and first orders theory, and more than work with the classic 5 options that everyone usually starts with the science of consciousness, global work, neural work, workspace, IIT, recurrence process, panpsychism, and other versions. You start with framing high order and first order views as a kind of cross-cutting future of every theory. Okay, this is I thought was also an interesting project of the book. So how we can read those theories as either high order theories or first order theories, and how we can see those theories being developed as a version of a first order theory or a version of high order theory. Okay. So that said, I will just jump into my my remarks. Most of my questions will be addressed to the empirical chapter of the book. I think it's a very relevant chapter where you try to what has been a challenge for high orders views to actually be in dialogue with the empirical data. Okay, so so I think you do a very nice job. So you have an interesting remark saying that the grounds for accepting a theory of consciousness are empirical, and I kind of agree with this idea. But I think also most of your defense of the high order theory is more defensive than actually trying to accommodate a different type of empirical data. So one worry for your view is how the view could be refuted if the view could accommodate all type of empirical data. But I will make this claim more precisely in a moment. I just want to say that I will focus more in the empirical chapter. So I have 3 kind of general points that I want to make. One is the first one claim you have right in the introduction. Every theory is implicitly high order or first order theories. Okay, so you can accommodate, each theory can have a version, if I well understood the claim, each theory of consciousness can be framed in a high order view or first order view. And I want to discuss this claim whether if any theory can actually accommodate high order versions, maybe this how actually what would be the way to falsify the view if all the views can accommodate this. The other claim is a more specific claim about unfalsibility. So you also try your own version of high order view, the horror. You try to accommodate with different types of empirical finding. So it tries to accommodate different neural locations, richness, relational structure. So I was wondering if what would be the way to falsify the view if the view could accommodate different types of empirical data. But I will reframe this in with more details. And my final point will be three points, three challenges for the view related to infant consciousness that could apply to animal consciousness. But I will ask more. I will frame the questions more regarding developmental issues of infant consciousness in humans. I don't know, maybe Jake might have more questions related to animal consciousness. Yeah, so I'll start with the first point. And Jake, feel free to add if you also have some points on this. So in the page 6 of introduction, you say that every theory of consciousness is either a higher order theory or not. Okay, I think there is. I think the big idea here is that global neural workspace, IIT, local recurrence, and attention theories could each come in higher order versions. Okay, so you can see different features of each of those theories. Although I'm focused on those on these views here, but you also think panpsychism could come in a high order version. What I thought was really challenging to think about a particle that would have a higher order representation of their own state. But it's putting aside whether this claim actually capture the entire landscape of theories, even if it capture those views I'm thinking here, like the global workspace, IIT, local recurrence, and attention theories, I read a very interesting claim regarding whether those views could come, each of them, in a high order version. So in this sense, the high order theories will not be a fifth contender in the debate of theories of consciousness, but much more a dimension of every theory, if I well understood this claim. Okay. I think the claim is interesting, and maybe there is something here to explore, but maybe I was wondering if the claim is kind of proved too much. Okay, so I want to hear more what you have to say about this. I think the fact, so one thing I had in mind is the fact that you can actually find a feature, F, for instance, whatever feature, in any theory, then this does not make that feature actually something that is what is playing the role of a marker for consciousness in that theory, okay? So it doesn't make the feature like what organizing feature in the landscape of the theory, okay? So to actually say that the higher order aspect can be implicitly present in all theory, you have to tell us how this higher order awareness actually is playing a relevant role in the explanation of consciousness in that view. And I don't know if actually you would have like a reply for this, actually, to place the high order component that might be present in every view as the key feature of that view. Okay, yeah. So this would be, and I think it was without this meta claim. This would be much more a weak claim. Okay, if you cannot show that in each high order version of a global workspace, in each high order version of the local recurrence process or the attentional process view, if you cannot say that this feature is the key feature that actually explains consciousness in the view, your claim that every theory of consciousness is either higher order theory or not, it would be like a weak claim. So I want to say, if you want accurate to bite the bullet and endorse the stronger claim that you can show that all those views, all those theories could be designed in a way that has a high order, in a high order version, and prove that high order feature is the key feature of the view, or whether you want to embrace a more weak claim. Yeah, okay, this would be my first point. Yeah, I think Jake has a point on this.
Okay, should we talk about these as you go through the points, or I thought you were gonna make all three and then we'll come back. Either way, it's fine.
I think I can make the first point and then go for the other points, and maybe Jake has a, yeah.
Well, yeah, I've been wondering the same thing for a long time, and I guess I want some clarification. Is just what exactly is the distinction between a higher order or order view on your view? Because I feel like it's too weak to say that a higher order view is one that somehow involves higher order awareness. Because you could construct all kinds of theories where the higher order awareness is maybe necessary, but isn't playing like a determinative or core role. Like here's like a really silly theory, a theory where you've got a conscious state, but in order for that state to have phenomenal consciousness, you have to have a higher order state about some other state. And like just contingently, because of the way the brain is organized, you've got to have this higher order state about some other state. Neither of those states are conscious. You know what I mean? But that makes this state phenomenally conscious. Is that view a higher order view? Anyway, so I feel like that's kind of maybe I don't know if that's echoing some things that Claudia is saying, but often been unsure about exactly how to characterize what is, what makes a state a higher state. So anyway, does that make sense?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, there's a lot going on there. So first of all, I would say that my beginning inclination is that we would like to theorize at the psychological level because consciousness is a mental thing of some property of the mind, and that's going to involve psychological concepts from our palette from which we want to theorize. So I don't really think that you can have a truly neuroscientific theory of consciousness in the sense that I want to use the word theory of consciousness, because I don't think it's going to really explain the thing that you're trying to account for. So I want to draw the distinction between an implementation and a theory. So I would say that you have a theory at the psychological level, and then you look in the brain for how that gets implemented. Like, what is the brain doing such that it doing that is the implementation of those psychological concepts. So that's the way I would think about this relation between, well, first of all, where I would start. Like, what are we even looking for? So then when like I look at a theory like RPT, recurrent processing theory, and it says, aha, well, consciousness involves recurrent processing at the 350 millisecond range or 250 millis before whatever, so a certain time frame. And you say, okay, but that's not a psychological level concept. That's a neural concept. So like, what is it that they are actually talking about when they are talking about recurrent processing? Well, I think that when you actually dig down into it, what they're talking about is an awareness of things in the external environment. And that in the overarching psychological theorizing side of things, people like Victor Lama are thinking, well, it's just you being aware of the thing in the environment. That's what consciousness is. And awareness is of the thing in the world, so it's a first order thing. And that turns out that awareness of that kind just is this recurrent processing. So that really he's guided, I would argue, he's guided by this implicit psychological theorizing that guides him to look for this relevant neurological implementation, so that the theory really is not RPT. RPT is in my way of thinking, is an implementation of a first order idea, namely that consciousness is a kind of awareness of what's out there. And then there are other implementations of that very same idea. So for instance, global workspace theory, as is typically presented, is a competing model of what it is to be aware of things in the external environment, as I think of things. And when you look at the theory, the reason why you can come to that conclusion is because all they ever talk about are things in the world. They don't talk about things, you being aware of things in the mind or anything like that playing a role in phenomenal consciousness, the explanation of it. So I would say what makes them first order theories is that they are ultimately implementations of this psychological concept, awareness, and specifically awareness of things out there. And what they differ on is like in cases where you can't report and say, are you really aware of the thing? So for example, global workspace takes one answer, recurrent process takes another answer. So in answer to Claudia's question, I would say I would take the stronger claim and say that each one of those theories could be modified into a higher order view, because you would just add to it the claim that the state of which you are aware is the RPT state, or the globally broadcast state. And then you need a theory of inner awareness that somehow playing the right role. Now, how would you know what that right role is? That's the kind of what I thought the thrust of the question was, in terms of falsifiability, and how would you know which thing is doing that? So I want to address that in a second. But to Jake's question, what I would say is that what makes it in my, so sometimes I waffle on this a little bit, because when I use the word theory of consciousness, what I'm really thinking of is something that in terms of an explanation. So I don't really think that like panpsychism is a theory of consciousness in some sense, in that sense maybe. So I don't know. Although I do think, by the way, that Dave's sometimes toyed with a version of panpsychism, which is a kind of higher order-esque panpsychist type view. It is very strange, but I do think that's kind of this. It's, you know, the self-representational electron is a kind of commitment of some of these views. So I do think that, and then there are people who would deny that. So I do think of each view that is a theory of consciousness, that you could have a higher order version of it. I would say that, but I don't know if that means it's implicitly. So maybe in Victor's sense, the recurrent processing itself is a kind of implementation of inner awareness. I mean, I don't think we have any reason to think that is or isn't the case as of right now. So now, yeah, so I do think I would, as far as I'm understanding your first question, I think I would take the stronger route and say that every theory could be turned into a higher order theory. And the way that I view like RPT and global workspace theory, as in my own thinking, is as accounts of the first order state. So they are going to be answers to the question, what are you aware of when you higher order represent? And if you're a global, you could say global workspace, what you're aware of is the stuff that's globally broadcast. And therefore the first order states may be in the prefrontal cortex and floating around in working memory. That's kind of Ledoux's view in some sense, I take it. Or you might say, no, they're the states that are in V4. They're the recurrent processing states. Those are the states of which you become aware. So I would view that as like, those are just first order, because they're just theories of awareness. So that's how I would differentiate between these views. Is higher order views are ones that invoke inner awareness. First order views are ones that deny that inner awareness is important. And the kind of invoking of inner awareness that I have in mind is that it plays the right explanatory role. Because there are people who say, I'm thinking of Nico Salines, who has his ascending road view, which is kind of your view, it's the silly view that you mentioned, Jake. He does think that there is just kind of necessary connection between first order states and inner awareness of some kind, but that's not at all relevant to why the first order state is conscious. So higher order theories simply are the ones that say there's something about inner awareness that's relevant to the nature of experience, to the explanation for why it is the way it is. So I don't think that is a really hard distinction to make. So the kind of view you were saying, where you represent that there's a dog next door, I'm not sure that's a higher order view the way I just put it. But anyway, so if you turn it into some kind of weird higher order view where you're representing a mental state, but in a weird way, then yeah, I don't know. I would say maybe it depends on the specifics of it. So now, as to Claudia's other question about how could you falsify any of this stuff, I would say, well, you can't falsify an approach, but unless you go through all the candidates and falsify them, or show that there's something wrong with the whole approach. So that the empirical way to falsify these theories is looking at specific implementations of them. So there's a specific version of the theory, first order theory, which is global workspace theory. There's a specific version of first order theory, which is recurrent processing theory. There's a specific version of higher order theory, which is prefrontal horror theory, etc. So I see them as kind of on a par, where prefrontal horror theory is kind of analogous to like global workspace theory, and then these other versions are more analogous to those. And yeah, so you just gotta kind of go through and look at them individually and compare their predictions. But I don't see why that would make them unfalsifiable. They all kind of vary on what they're going to say about key cases. But so yeah, I'm not sure, Claudia, did I?
Yeah, I just want to I think some theories, it seems more plausible for me that they will come in a high order version. But some theories seems that to build in the high order state seems you're really get very far away from the original proposal. I think recurrent process view would be one of those. Maybe your idea
But why?
is that, yeah, I thought if I well understood, maybe your idea would be, I don't know, the recurrence could be seen as a monitoring of the processing.
Yeah.
But then you have to really change the view, because the view is that what plays a role is not this monitoring of the states, but the recurrence process actually make the first order state conscious. So it's, I don't know, it seems that you have to at least change a little bit the view. The global broadcast, I see better version. I see like that the view itself, the theory itself, can accommodate high order processing more easily, and I think I think this is one of the reasons there are many versions of the high order views that try to connect with a global workspace view. But the recurrent process, it seems, would require at least to change the way the view was formulated. But yeah, but
Well,
maybe
I
you could
mean,
say a little bit more in this, in a more pure, the pure cases of first order views. It seems, yeah, how you would accommodate in those cases.
Well, I mean,
well,
couldn't I'm
Yeah,
sorry, Richard.
maybe Jack has
no,
something.
yeah, go
Yeah.
ahead, Jen.
I was just going to say, like, I mean, couldn't the recurrent processing higher order person kind of make a similar move to the global workspace kinds of efforts to accommodate higher order views? So sometimes, like when you have these views that kind of glue those together, you say like what makes it into the global workspace is, higher order awareness is like a necessary condition. It's like a gatekeeper for letting things into the global workspace. And you could just make the same kind of move with recurrent processing, that like the higher order awareness is like a necessary gatekeeper for there to become recurrent processing or recurrent processing. I mean, I'm with you that I think that these are sort of kludge add-ons that are sort of distinct from the original first order views. And so I guess, yes, you could create this kind of hybrid thing that accommodates some insights from both. It seems to me a little unmotivated, but it doesn't seem to me like you couldn't do it.
Well, I was
And is
making a
that
different point though, which I mean, I agree with what you're saying, Jake, but what I was saying was that since RPT is not defined psychologically, you can interpret it in any way you want, basically. So what's
I
defined in
see.
terms of neural activity. And then there's an assumption about what that neural activity indicates psychologically. So what we know is that there's neurons which activate in a certain feed forward way in a certain time window, and then at a certain point they activate in a recurrent way. And then how do you interpret that psychologically? Well, why couldn't the recurrency be an inner awareness of the kind that, why isn't it a horror? Like I say, a higher order representation. And that's what consciousness is. And it doesn't make any state back there conscious. It's just so my point was that unless you interpret the neural stuff psychologically, you can't get anywhere. And in fact, what those guys are doing is implicitly interpreting it psychologically, but just as first order awareness, as this is just awareness of stuff out there. And and what I was saying is I don't really see that we have good reason. I mean, we don't really, it's a mess right now how you map the psychological concepts onto the neural stuff. And so that's one postulate. And I'm not saying it's silly or wrong. I'm just saying it's not known to be true, that recurrent processing is a first order thing simply because it happens in V4. And
That's a really good point.
Yeah, that's all I'm trying to say.
That's a good
And
point.
I'm not sure if, Claudia, that's what you were finding like implausible or something. So
yeah, not implausible. I just think that maybe this would be a big change in the view, in the theory. I'm not saying that the view could not, you could not build in an awareness process.
Yeah.
That would be a plausible view connecting with what the recurrence process is describing. My question is this still the same view? Or is this just a version, a high order version of recurrent process theory? Or this is a new theory? Because maybe some commitments of the theory would be really changed a lot. Yeah, just one question. If it would still be the same view, or
yeah.
but there are some views that I would have a hard time to apply. I don't know, if you think about all the 20 theories described in the taxonomy that Seth and Bain proposed, I was wondering, I don't know, maybe views that do not require cortex. I don't know, the midbrain view by Berger.
Yeah.
If this view could have a high order version of that view, if actually these distinctions between first order and high order, and the idea that all the views could come with a version of high order would actually apply all across the current theories of consciousness we have.
Yeah.
Or if there are some views that would be a hard time to accommodate.
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and it's a good point. I think that what I'm actually committed to now that I'm thinking through this here is, well, maybe this isn't what I said, because who's got time to actually say what they mean? I'm just kidding. But anyway, a sloppy writer is what the actual answer is. But I think that what I'm trying to say is that when you come to this landscape of theories, people often present this, like recurrent processing and global workspace theory are two different theories of consciousness. And then there's higher order theories. And then they're like, wait, but why is there are all these varieties of them, higher to thought, higher to this, higher to that. And so it looks like it's kind of strange. Like there's all these weird varieties and then these different kinds of theories on the other side. But it seems to me that really these other theories just are offered as first order theories, because the people who are the theorists are implicitly first order theorists. And so what they've offered is a first order theory. But if they were higher order theorists, in other words, if they had the intuition that some kind of inner awareness was important, then they would be describing what they're saying in a different way. They might be pointing at the same stuff and describing it differently, because we don't know. And so, for example, another example of this is Steve Fleming, I think, his work, where he has the Haas model, and he has this generative higher order state space model, where if you activate the higher order state space, it sort of is generative in a sense. Activity in the higher order module will percolate down and activate the states at the first order level. And so he thinks, well, okay, so there's this thing that people like a global ignition, this nonlinear transformation at a certain time, people associate with global broadcasting. That's an interpretation of what's happening there. Another interpretation is that there's some kind of process by which the first order state is being updated, which results in that kind of activity that we notice there. And so it's not clear how to interpret at the psychological level what these things are doing. But yet it's often assumed by these guys, especially in cognitive neuroscience. I think they're very sloppy about this a lot of times, where they just assume that since it's in V4, it's first order and visual. And since it's in prefrontal cortex, it's not visual. But if you're thinking that the visual part of the brain is the part where consciousness of visual stuff is, then I just think we don't know where to look yet. We don't know where to look in the parietal cortex or frontal cortex. It's a big mystery. So these questions often get run together. And that's what I'm trying to sort out in this part, is by saying, look, so I agree with you. And then what you're making me think right now by what you're saying is that, yes, if you start off at the psychological level and say, I'm giving a theory defined in terms of first order awareness, then probably you can't turn that theory into a higher order theory. So that my more limited claim would be that every theory is either one or the other. And then maybe you were saying the stronger claim is that you could take any theory and turn it as it is into the other. And I think I would kind of soften that to say, no, you could take any neurological theory and turn it, but not psychological. So I would then distinguish the psychological from the neurological and say that stronger claim applies to the neural level, and this weaker claim applies to the psychological level. So I don't know if that would help at all, but that's what I'm thinking now.
Yep, good.
Cool. Anything else, Jake, on this, or do you want to move to the second? Well, we can always come back to this stuff,
Yes, should we move to Yeah, so my second question will be about, you just start to reply, but about falsifiability. I don't know if Jake has another point more close to the discussion that we're having. Okay, so just making this point and then maybe, yeah. So, one thing I was interested in chapter 4 that is a chapter that um, you try to say what would be the empirical grounds to accept your view.
Yeah.
And so I think it's a positive. I thought this was a positive side, but actually make the theory more vulnerable, if I could say. So you try to show how the view could accommodate different results. Okay, so the neurolocation, the richness, the rich versus sparse,
Yeah.
the atomistic versus compositional. You have your preferred field that, if I remember, is the prefrontal cortex, richness, compositional, or horror. But actually, you say, okay, but you could, although you prefer this version, the view could accommodate the other versions. Okay.
Exactly. I will say, though, by prefer, what I mean is that if I had reason to empirically doubt it, I would probably stop caring about the theory as much.
Sorry, what to say?
I said if I had reason to empirically doubt that theory, then I would probably stop caring about core theory as much. Not to say that those other versions couldn't be defended by someone, but I probably wouldn't be as interested in it.
Okay, as invested in the this is the view thing. Yeah, so
but that doesn't mean it's unfalsifiable, because I do think that there's always kind of a way to shuffle around stuff so that you can have a consistent interpretation of the data. I believe that's always going to be true. It's just that it's going to be less interesting and less fruitful to occupy that corner of space. There will be someone over there, though, but it won't be me.
But I think if each of those versions can be defended on its own, so it's hard to show what will refute the view. If high order's view can all be accommodated, and if the view that is not prefrontal cortex, not rich, and not compositional is so close to the first order view, so why this is not first order theory? So if you remove all the apparatus, the prefrontal cortex location, the richness, and the compositional aspect, what remains actually distinctive from high order views, from first order views? It seems like really the view collapse in the version of first order view. And yeah, so one worry is the unfalsibility worry, that maybe if the view if different versions of high order view can accommodate to different data, different findings, it seems that the view can never be falsified, because it just say, okay, this is a different version of high order view, that the finding that can accommodate this type of finding. So one question is this. The other question is, if the version that is the opposite of your own version is so removed of all the characteristic of high order view, that seems collapse in a first order view. So the kind of two words in this.
I guess I would say.
I don't know if I can give you more details, but yeah, I'm making the question in a very general frame.
Okay, Jake, did you look like you were about to say something?
Not really. I mean, I do wonder, for the reasons that you gave, Richard, like why people keep talking about falsifiability in these contexts. I mean, I don't really know what we mean by that. We're talking about like Popper, like a theory is only a scientific theory if you can specify a single piece of evidence, that would give up the theory. Like, does anybody seriously consider that? Like, for the reasons that you were giving, like, you can always jiggle things around to hold on to a theory. There was a lot of poo-pooing in the first session of Quine, but that's like a kind
Well,
of
that was
classic
me who
Quine.
did that.
Yeah, yeah, that's kind of a classic Quine point, and I like that. But I mean, maybe what you have in mind is like whether a theory, not that it can't be falsified, but whether it's progressive, like in a Lakatos kind of way of talking, or degenerative, and so you want the theory to be like a progressive research program where it's making new predictions and going out on limbs and accommodating new phenomena and so forth. And you think the higher order view can do that, even if it's not like there's a single piece of evidence, because even progressive research programs aren't falsifiable in this sort of like narrow way. But I mean, this is like now moving into more conversations about, like philosophy of science and methodology. But just like my general take is, yeah, like the demand to be able to specify what's the one experiment that will falsify this theory, just it's like, I don't think any scientist has ever really thought that that's how science works. Um, anyway, so I'm just echoing points that you were making, I think.
You being me. Yeah, okay. I thought you meant you being her.
No, you being Richard.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry.
No, I have a point to be me again.
Okay.
Yeah, so maybe the point is, in the way, I'm not saying that there is a different way to frame, to reply to the unfalsibility worry. But I think the way you actually should describe it in that chapter is, there are different versions of the high order views, and if one version is refuted by an evidence, the other version still survives.
Yeah.
And if the other version is refuted by another finding, the other version will still survive. So,
I mean, the way I think
so
of that.
maybe the question is, what is not just what would falsify horror, but is what would falsify each of those implementations. There is no way that one single thing would falsify each of the implementation, because the other implementation would survive.
Yeah.
Okay.
So I think that's a fair challenge, except that, well, maybe it's not fair, because what I would say is no one's going to make that kind of same complaints against recurrent processing and global workspace theory. And no one's going to say, oh, but what the piece of evidence that falsifies global workspace theory doesn't falsify recurrent processing theory. But they're both first order theories on my view. So they're just different implementations of first order theories. So of course, there's always going to be a different first order theory you can fall back on if you think this version, this implementation of it has been falsified. You could become a global workspace theory if you think there's evidence against RPT. And that would just be switching to a different kind of first order theory. And I think something like that is mirrored on the higher order side. I mean, on all these sides, actually, but that there's always another version of the theory that you could fall back on and be like, oh, well, if you just reorganize things like this, then I could get away with it. And so that's why I think Jake was saying that what the kind of, progressive versus degenerative distinction is really helpful here. But I do think that there would be a kind of like general falsifier for these kinds of views, which is extreme and not havable, but in principle could be had, which is this brain clamp stuff that I always talk about, of keeping the first order activity the same and then varying the higher order states and seeing what happens, or vice versa, keeping the higher order states the same and varying the first order states. And a lot of part of my research empirically has been looking for cases that are this. And that's why, when I first started studying this and I was in classes with David Roosevelt, he would talk about wine tasting. You have the same first order state, but different experience. And then people say, well, maybe it's not the same first order state. And then you talk about, so there was always this sense that what we were looking for was some sense in which the psychological states at the first order were the same. And then you could see a difference in what it was like for you. And then when, I met Haquan and heard about subjective inflation, I thought, so here's some empirical stuff that looks like that. Turns out it's really hard to nail down in the empirical details to get any kind of confidence that you really do have the states matched in the way that the prediction requires. But still, the general idea that first order theories would be triumphant as a class if you could show that you could vary the higher order state and not change the experience at all. That, you know, you're looking at a red thing and you're messing around with every higher order thought and you suddenly believe it's green, see it, but it just still looks red. That would really wipe away those theories. Or vice versa, if you could hold the first order states constant, whatever they are, you'd have to find out what they are and then hold them constant and then vary the higher order content along any dimension at all, you would better have some change in the experience of the subject. So it seems to me that that would be a way of like falsifying the classes of theories. But we don't have that because we can't achieve this ideal condition of keeping these, because we don't know what they are. We can psychologically define them, but looking in the brain is like, oh my God, it's a mess in there. So we're at the early stages, I would say. And the worst limit condition is the Dennett style version, where there's no systematic correlation between what's going on inside the head and the psychological level theorizing. All there is like person level stuff that it tracks. And then you can't make any kind of guesses about what states are inside. That would be horrible, but you could have a kind of higher order Dennett interpreter, you know. So I do think that that's a positive. It's like a very keep it away from me type of view, but it's not impossible. So anyway, I would say that all of these views are on the table, and that doesn't mean that it's like unfalsifiable or any way different than the first order. I would just say we're just becoming more sensitive to the landscape and the distinction between the psychological level and the neural implementation of it, the way you could have different versions of first order theory, the way you could have different versions of higher order theory, what in principle would count as like decisive evidence, but given that we're not in ideal conditions, like how do we approximate something that is close to the ideal condition is the actual empirical challenge that we face ourselves in. And so it's going to be a lot messy, like the way you described, where it's going to be, but in the ideal case, it wouldn't be messy. We could just hold some stuff constant and twiddle the right dial and be like, look, nothing changed, therefore, end of story. But we don't have the control or the understanding of the relationship of these levels that would allow us to do that. But that's my view, is that ultimately that is how we would decisively settle this. But given that probably that's too hard for us, all we can do is kind of try to find these approximations, and there's always going to be a Neurath corner where someone can hide and rearrange everything else out there and hide in their little corner. And it just will become increasingly clear that it's not interesting to do so, in the sense that it's just not, we're not getting interesting questions. We're not being led to new ideas. It doesn't apply to another area. We're like, whoa, look at that. Whereas I think that, you know, one of the arguments, we try to make this argument in the Intrinsic Cognitive Science paper that I wrote with Joe and Hakwan, where we're like, part of the reason why higher order theories are interesting is because of the translational benefits of thinking about some psychological distress, some psychological disorders, thinking about why treatments for depression change the behavior but don't make the person feel better, right? These ideas have the power to maybe help us understand some of those things, which is, if we're going to break out of this kind of puzzle of how we decide, it's going to be those kinds of things, I think, that it leads us in interesting, unexpected directions. Kind of the same idea that you get from people that talk about string theory a lot. It's like, why do we take it so seriously? Because it has so many surprising, unexpected applications. It leads us in so many interesting new directions that we would never thought of. Doesn't mean that it's true, but it means that, you know, we should still be taking it seriously. So anyway, that's a lot that I said, but I don't know if you have anything you want to come back on that.
Jake, you have anything to?
No, that all sounded good to me. I mean,
Yeah.
it kind of sounds, yeah, like it's echoing this Lakatashian language of making new predictions, being progressive, leading in some weird directions. Of course, it doesn't mean it's true, but it means it's a program that you want to kind of stick with.
Yeah.
Whereas if it's only defending itself and only hiding in the Noreth corner and only knocking off objections and so forth, then it looks degenerate and it looks like it's not that interesting. And yeah, I agree with you that there's like a million ways that high order theory can be sort of unpacked and worked out. And there's, you know, not just at the implementation level, but I think even thinking through at the psychological level, like how to make sense of the theory. And so in that way, it's like very fruitful and has a lot of room to be worked out, but also that gives it the room to be flexible and dodge objections and so forth, which makes it look like it's unfalsifiable, but really what it is progressive in this kind of, I think, good way that good science is.
I mean, the same is true for first order theories, right? Or do you not think that, Jack?
Yeah, no, I think that's also broadly true for first order theories. I mean, I have a different kind of complaint against them, which we can bring up when I get to start asking you some questions, but like really about just, I mean, the big thing that I want to talk about is like the motivations for the higher order approach in general. And obviously that having to do with the TP, but I don't want to get off onto that now.
Yeah, no, Jake, if you want to move to this question, because my other questions are all more moving to the developmental tensions of the book.
And I do have a bunch of questions about that too. So okay, I mean, I don't know.
We could do the transitivity principle, and then I think it'll naturally segue into the third question.
Yeah,
actually.
I agree. I agree.
Yeah.
And then we can, by the end, just do the developmental issues.
Sure. I should say, first off, like, we've been at it for an hour, but I haven't really said anything like my complimentary remarks about your book and everything. So I just want to first off say, Richard, like, congratulations, so much. I think the book is just, it is an incredible achievement. I'm so thrilled for you. Yeah, it's obviously, it's really great.
Well, hey, those guys didn't give me any compliments. Now I'm going to go back.
Yeah, they just dove in. Yeah.
I'm just kidding. Thanks, guys. I appreciate it. No, that means a lot. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, reading it, I was like, I was so excited.
Yeah, I'm giving all hearts and and congratulations.
Well, I didn't think anyone would be interested in this book when I wrote it, I was like, I mean, I think it's interesting, but I don't know. Anyway, I appreciate the comment. Thank you.
No, of course. And yeah, I mean, we've been arguing about this stuff for a long time, and and it's a really nice way to have it all in one place in a really thoughtfully argued way. I mean, and I found it like both, I don't know, like I agree with just so much of what you're doing in it, but also have what I think are like some very serious disagreements about like very basic things in the book, and I don't know, I'm still, even after years of thinking about your stuff, like kind of on the fence about whether or not like my concerns are like really just purely terminological and like not super substantive and interesting.
I know, and we've written papers together, and we still have.
And we've written papers together. Yeah, exactly. I want to use you against you in some of my questions.
Okay.
Cool. Yeah. Because I think because the way I was thinking about things in some of our papers, like, I felt like you were, at least, I don't know if I strong armed you or whatever, but more willing to kind of say things in the way that I wanted to say them. But yeah, I guess my main concern about the project, which is really where I think like the views that we defend in the literature like come apart. And I should say, I want to take a page from your playbook. When I talk to people, I come across as much more of a true believer in, higher order and what you're calling the traditional higher order view.
Yeah.
And so I kind of want to kind of press back from the traditional perspective. But I should say, like, I don't know, who knows what's true. This is all very complicated and beyond my pay grade. And so,
it's okay to be a true believer.
but maybe I don't know. Some Tuesdays.
Well, you're more firmly you're more firmly intuitively pulled by these ideas, I would say, than I am.
Yes. But I also want to say that I'm not like speaking for the traditional view. So Absolutely. I'm defending my version of the traditional view.
Yes.
Okay. So those are kind of like Richard qualifications to like the kind of thing I want to say. But okay, but all that kind of ground clearing out of the way. Yeah, my main concern has to do with your, like, I don't know, rejection or neutrality with regard to the transitivity principle. And I guess my main worry about the horror way of describing the higher order approach, which again, in many ways, like I think we think like the same molecules are there and the same molecules are moving in the same way. So the implementation stuff we're probably all going to agree about, or at least I'm happy to go along with a lot of the stuff you say about implementation. It's describing the psychological level and what we want to, I mean, it's fundamentally what state do we want to call as the conscious state, I think is like where I seriously disagree, or at least I'm concerned. And so like a big move that you make in the book, and that I think is central to distinguishing horror from like the traditional view, is distinguishing what people in the traditional side call state consciousness from what most folks in consciousness studies call phenomenal consciousness. And I think horror wants them to coincide in a certain way, but not in the way that I want them to coincide. I want them to be, if there's phenomenal consciousness, it just is state consciousness. And that's motivated, I think, by thinking about a traditional way of construing the transitivity principle. So the traditional way of construing the transitivity principle is if you're in a state and you're not in anywhere any way aware that you're in that state, then that state's not conscious. So what is it for the state to be conscious? It's for you to be somehow aware that you're in that state. And horror has to reject that because you want to say that the state that's conscious is the state in virtue of which you're aware of yourself as being in the state, not the state that you're aware of yourself as being in. And I guess a way to put the comment just like as a question is just, I'm not sure I totally understand the motivation for thinking higher order awareness figures at all in the explanation of phenomenal consciousness if you reject the transitivity principle as I've stated it. And so I have lots of like follow-up questions and stuff like that to talk about, because I think I have a broad idea about what you want to do, which is that you think it falls out of experimental results. And I'm skeptical that that can do it for kind of reasons that you've already alluded to. But anyway, so I don't know if I should stop there and like let you say some stuff. I have like more like kind of direct objection type ways of putting my point. So maybe I'll just give you one, which is so I think you do a really cool thing in the book where you try to say that there's like a way of rejiggering the transitivity principle that fits with horror.
HTTP.
The HTTP, right? But you do kind of quite late in the book, unless I missed it and you did it earlier, where you're like, you say something like, well, look, there is a way to show how you could be moved by a transitivity to principle type way of thinking about consciousness, phenomenal consciousness, but that's compatible with horror. So you say, like, if you're in a state, but you're in no way aware of being in that state, then you're not in a conscious state. So you're in a conscious state only if you're aware of being in a state. And that's supposed to be, does this make sense?
Yeah.
Yeah.
You just said the word "a" funny, and I didn't know if that was important.
Oh, well, I'm trying to like, because I'm trying to emphasize it.
Okay. I was like, is that a special thing?
Can you just say again?
No, you're in a state,
okay,
yes. But in aware of being in a state, then you're not in a conscious state. So you're in a conscious state only if you're aware of being in a state. And that's supposed to be a way of saying the TP that's compatible with horror, because now it's open that the state that's conscious isn't the state you're aware of being in, but the state in virtue of which you're aware of being in the state. Yeah. I think that's a cool move, and it's a lot like the move that you and I make in our paper in Phil Psych, where we say, well, actually, you can connect phenomenal consciousness and state consciousness by putting the TP in terms of what it's like, which I like that move a lot. I can't remember who thought of that. I think it was you.
Yeah. Well, it doesn't matter. It's our idea, Jake.
It's our idea. Yeah, it's a great idea though. But this version of it in the book works, because I don't think that claim is much weaker than the TP, and I also think it's false. Because, and kind of like, kind of related to like the weird view, the ascending road version of the view that we were talking about at the very beginning. So it's compatible with that version of the TP that you could be aware of being in a different state. And so in a conscious state, and in a state that you're not aware of being in. You see what I mean? It's a bit of a technical like point.
Yeah, but I mean, I also have a technical response, which is that I weasel out of this because I included very carefully in the definition the word appropriately.
Appropriately.
Yes.
But
so
but the appropriate,
it's the one that appropriately. How did I put it? A mental state is phenomenally conscious if and only if it appropriately makes one aware of one's own mind, and it has to make you aware of your own mind. So just having any unawareness of something else is not going to meet the definition. I mean, maybe you're saying it's arbitrary or stipulative, or it doesn't have good motivation or something like that.
Well, so that's so that version of it, which is the reversing one, I want to know what the common sense version of it is before. So, because I don't think anybody would agree to the claim, if you're in a state, but you're not in any way appropriately aware of being in a state, then you're not in a conscious state. That does not sound like, if you want to call it intuitive or common sense or like something I would agree to. Whereas, let's call it the traditional PP, like the typical way that it's like, stated in the literature, that's supposed to be like, I don't like saying intuitive because I have issues with thinking about intuitions, but it's supposed to be like, it's supposed to be a thing that ordinary people would agree to.
Yes.
It's supposed to be in folk psychology, whatever that is. So like that's about, if you're in a state but you're not aware that you're in that state, then that state isn't conscious. And like everybody, like everyone's supposed to agree to that. Now I know that the transitivity principle, when stated in the contrapositive form, is controversial, and people say that they don't agree with it. But it's really the flip version, which is logically equivalent but not typically stated as the transitivity principle, but it is just the statement. That's supposed to be like no one can disagree with that. And actually, I wonder, like, do you disagree with that? That if you're in a state, you have no idea, you're not in any way aware of that state, you think that that state still could be conscious? I mean, you
That's the higher
I
order
don't know.
state. Yeah, of course.
Yeah, that seems, yeah, I don't know who would agree to that other than somebody in the grip of a theory.
Overflow theorists agree to it. I mean, look, there's a lot of stuff to say here. So,
Yeah.
The first thing I would say is that I don't really super care about common sense. I mean, I ended up as a philosopher, and my fallback career was musician. So, common sense maybe not my strong suit here. Joke. Anyway, so but I don't want to rely on folk psychological theorizing overly much, and I don't really care if you can trace back the things I say to folk psychology, because I think that folk psychology bad, cognitive science good. So I think that when you want to say what a mental state is, and you want to start talking about these kinds of things, you should not talk to the folk. You should talk to the cognitive scientists. And so that's how I think of what a mental, like, what is a mental state? I say it's whatever the cognitive scientists say, just like whatever a physical thing is what the physicists say. You look to the science. And so, there's a debate about that for right now, like take the activity in the amygdala. Joe Ledoux is going to say that's not a mental state that's occurring in the amygdala because mental states are the ones that involve modeling, and there's no modeling in the amygdala. Whereas someone like Jacques Penske is going to say, no, that is a mental state there, that low-level activity in the amygdala. So there's a debate about that, and we have to make a decision about it. But I don't know empirically that we're not sure what to think about this yet. So do you want to count the activity in the amygdala as like unconscious fear? Ledoux says no. Penske says yes, maybe. So I think that these questions are still very much open, and that we don't really we're still in the early days of trying to map all of this stuff. So I want to proceed with a little bit of caution here. But when you're saying like, well, in the more objection-y way of putting things, what I would say is that there still is a common sensic-y sort of way I can put what I say, which is the following thing, which is that if you aren't in any way aware of something happening in your mind, then you don't have a conscious experience. I think that's as common sense as the way you put things, which is the contrapositive to my version of the transitivity principle. It's just like if you don't have any awareness of something happening in your mind, then what experience are you having? Like, so I don't see, like, does anyone deny that? I don't know. Yeah, lots of people maybe, but it's at least a way of saying something that's similar to the common sense thing, which I at least find some intuitive grip on myself. Like if I'm not aware, if I don't have any awareness of myself as being, seeing red or hearing a sound or feeling a pain, like you're still saying I'm conscious? Like that sounds weird to me. So that's at least as common sensic-y as like, when you're not aware of it, because anyway, at least by which I mean, if you took a poll of all the people, you'd probably find percentages of people saying yes and percentages of people saying no, and it's all a mess. So I just think that we don't want to lean too much on this folk stuff. We want to say, what are the various candidates? And when we start theorizing, we take the thing we're theorizing about and we ask what the appropriate level of theorizing is. In this case, I argue it's the psychological level. So we want to use that toolkit. And the primary thing that we're all talking about right now is awareness and representation. And so the question is whether the kind of awareness that's importantly involved is awareness of stuff out there or awareness of something in my mind. And why would you focus on those two kinds of awareness? Because historically, lots of people have said one or the other of those seem important. They just are the things that people have talked about. So, like, Aristotle said, we survey the masses because they've done a lot of induction for us. This is just what people think. That some people say it's just awareness out there. Some people say it's inner awareness. You have long traditions on both sides, going back to Aristotle, to Kant, to Brentano, to everyone. So just lots of stuff have been talked about in this area. Seems like an important question that we would like to have an empirical answer to. So we don't need transitivity principles. We don't need any of this stuff. We just need to know there are these two candidates that people have proposed as being importantly involved in the explanation of this thing that we find very important and want to explain. And those two candidates are inner awareness and outer awareness. And maybe there's some other candidates too, but I don't really see any other candidates, to be honest with you. There was a paper that came out recently that said, like, going beyond higher order and first order. And I was like, you can't do that. I almost wrote a response to it, but then I had to go teach my 70 classes. So anyway, I do think this is this line is very, very important. And it is a kind of hard and fast dichotomy in the way that Claudia was bringing up. I do think of things this way. So anyway, why would you be looking in this area? Because other people have this intuition that transitivity is important. And other people don't, though. So I just think that once you get to that point, you don't need to be motivated. You just need to be empirically minded. And these are proposed candidates, so let's test them. And I don't need to tell you why you should care about it. Well, I do, I think, actually. That's the first part of my book. I do kind of say everyone should care about this for the reason you said, namely, every theory is harboring commitments one way or the other. But beyond that, then why I personally should believe one theory or the other has to be because of these empirical considerations, not because of the transitivity principle. So that would be the first thing I would say. So that the reason I'm skeptical of it is because I don't think you need to motivate me. To motivate me, you need to have me choose between these options that are already established in the history of humans, I would say. So that I don't need to come up with it all on my own. I just need to recognize that people have proposed these two candidates and we still don't know which is right. And then we would like to know. So I would say that's good enough motivation already for investigating whether or not inner awareness is a relevant thing. And it doesn't rely on the transitivity principle. It just relies on this sociological fact that people have proposed this idea. And we don't know if it's true.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I have some reservations about that. I mean, I do think that you're right that people have been talking in these kinds of broadly two different ways. But I guess one could wonder, why does that matter? And here's the reason why. Because why are people talking about it in these two ways? Because they have a conception of what it is that they're talking about, an ordinary conception. And I think that that's all that I mean when I talk about trying to start with our folk psychological conception of things. You're just trying to get at how do ordinary people think about this ordinary thing, and that we can then start to do science about it.
But then you agree that they think about it in both ways.
Well, so that I'm skeptical. Maybe I'm a little skeptical about that. So let me give you a little bit more sort of background about how I think about these things, and then you can tell me. So I think that people in the contemporary consciousness literature, for the last 50 or so years, have described consciousness in allegedly a common sense way, but that there are these two ways. I'm not sure that ordinary people actually think about them in these two ways. I think that philosophers do. So here are the two ways. There's the transitivity principle way, and then there's the way that I think you're actually more drawn to, which is what I think a lot of people are drawn to, which I would regard as being more common among the first order theorists, which is the what it's like way of describing things. And in my view, I see these as at least being on par, which is why I think, for example, it makes sense to try to argue to people that they coincide.
Hold the bus here, buddy.
Yeah.
That can't be right. By the way, Claudia, do you want to say anything about this before I hold the bus?
No, I'm learning a lot.
Okay. I don't
I
want
don't have a
to.
horse on this race, so I'm just learning the distinction, and it's more clear because I always see you both like in the same side of the
Yeah, I know.
yeah, and see
I
the
really think
fine
we're
grained
not.
The
disagreements is
narcissism of small
really
differences.
no,
Yeah.
it's good. It's good. I'm learning about this.
Okay. So, okay. Anyway, then, so to jump back to this,
So you've
because
stopped the bus.
yeah. So I don't think that you can say what you just said in a theory neutral way. I don't think you can do that.
Okay.
That the transitivity principle, because this is so you because you sneak in something in here. I would say.
Okay.
So you first question is whether the folk have any opinions about consciousness, and if so, whether they think in terms of transitivity principles or not. I can tell you myself that I caught myself thinking in both ways at different times when I was an undergraduate. So it seemed to me as though you could elicit both of those. Like when people talk about transparency, I was like, yeah, duh. And then when people talked about transitivity, I was like, yeah, duh. And then I was like, wait, what? So, and I found many people, you can pull them towards transparency, push them towards transitivity, pull them away from transitivity, push them toward. It just seems like transparency is the counterpoint, namely that all we are conscious of is stuff out there. And that we're never aware of any mental thing at all. I think you can find that as strong, as widespread in the folk as you can this intuition about a state of which I'm not aware. So that's an empirical conjecture, and you know that luckily we have X5 people to go look at that. I'm not one of those guys, but luckily I think they can do it. Anyway, so that's one claim. Okay, that's the folk. But the sneak move that I want to guard against is that now we move to what does the science of consciousness have to explain? And there, the what it's like stuff picks out what the science of consciousness has to explain. Transitivity is a theory of what it's like stuff, but it is not just as good. And I'm going to very strongly disagree that it's just as good at picking out what the science of consciousness is in the business of investigating.
Okay, so that is, I think, perhaps our central disagreement.
Yeah.
So I don't think the transitivity principle, so I don't even like calling it the transitivity principle because the version of it that is stated, which is the contrapositive of what I think is the common sense version of it, is less intuitive sounding. But the first one is the if you're in a state and you're not in any way aware that you're in the state, then the state's not conscious. That claim, whatever we want to call it, it's called the contrapositive of the transitivity principle. That claim, in my view, is not theoretical. It is not part of a theory. It's capturing what ordinary people think consciousness, well, a fact about consciousness that they think in ordinary thinking. And from that claim, you can then spin out to get both a richer understanding of what the folk conception is by doing the contrapositive, and then go on your way to get a theory like higher order thought theory. So
I bet you
I
could get
view
the
it,
folk to agree to the contrapositive and disagree to the traditional positive, whatever the contrapositive is. I don't think they think they're
yeah,
equivalent, in other words. I don't think that ordinary people understand conditionals very well.
they don't. Fair enough.
Yeah.
And so there's a question. I mean, just to zoom back, so I think that you draw a really good distinction, and a very important one, between what is the science of consciousness or the science of X in the business of explaining,
Yeah.
versus the explanation. I think that's a super important distinction. And so to give you like an analogy, which of course you know, but think about water. Like you want to give a theory of what water is. Our common sense conception of water is not that it's H2O, even though everybody knows that now, right? What H2O is some scientific stuff that chemists tell us to explain this common sense thing that we can describe in common sense terms, the clear, drinkable, whatever. The primary intention in Dave's language versus the secondary intention or whatever. So you want to first get that description of, if you want to do science on water or consciousness, you want to get a description of the thing in the common sense terminology first, before you go on to trying to give any sophisticated account of how it's implemented chemically or neurally or whatever.
Yeah.
So what you and I think fundamentally disagree about is, how do you latch on, what is consciousness, right? And the biconditional that everybody gives in their papers post Nagel is what it's like. Yeah. And I think, I mean, or at least the view that I've been defending in the literature and, you know, that I've been drawn to is that that's the cheating, obscuring, unfair, theoretically loaded one.
Yeah.
It's a piece of technical terminology. It's not in common sense terminology. It's, you know, you can get your undergraduates to, you know, nod along and agree just as much as you can get them to nod along and agree to the TP, but they don't know what it means. Nope, nobody does. In my view, it's basically as thin as saying consciousness again. And so that's what I think leads to just a tremendous amount of confusion in the scientific literature on consciousness, and why you get a proliferation of 8 billion theories. Why does Seth and Bain, you know, catalog 22 theories, and there was a new one, and then 200 theories? Because if you start with this thing, what it's like, it can be correlated with anything. I mean, it could be correlated with higher order awareness. It could be correlated with recurrent processing. It could be correlated with global workspace. It could be correlated with it's in shoes and galaxies. I mean, we don't know what we're talking about because the definition that you've given or the characterization that's in common sense is borderline vacuous. So I don't think that could be what we're talking about because I don't know what we're talking about, right? I think implicitly the thing that everyone actually thinks, you know, you made an interesting point. You were saying, I think a lot of people, you know, cast their neurological theories in first order terms because they're first order theorists, but they could have cast it in higher order terms. I think people talk in this what it's like way, but they're actually implicitly higher order theorists because the only way that we have any grip on what consciousness is at the common sense level is through this higher order way of thinking about it, that a conscious state is just the one that you're aware of. They don't think of it in those terms, and you have to get them to do some work to think through to do a conditional from the intuitive one to the less intuitive one. But I think that's what implicitly everyone's got to be thinking about when they think about consciousness, because I otherwise don't know what we're talking about, right? Or why people would be talking about it throughout history. Like you're like, I mean, I'm sorry, I'm blathering, so I'll definitely let you jump into it.
Dig the hole deeper.
I mean, you know, like you know, you're like, I just want to look out and see that people have been talking in a higher order way. But I think that's like saying, I just want to look out and see that it just as it so happens, people talk about water as it's this clear drinkable thing. I mean, I don't know if it is or not, but I'll treat it as a good going hypothesis. That's a weird way to talk. No, clear drinkable thing just is water, right? And so it's not surprising people talk about that. Then we need a theory to figure out what it is, and it might turn out to be H2O. I think similarly.
First of all, I don't think that's where you start. So water is whatever it is that stuff over there. That's where you start.
Which stuff?
Give me a glass and I'll point at it.
But are you pointing at the glass? Are you pointing at the water? Are you pointing at the backside of the glass? Are you pointing at the thing behind it? Which one are you pointing at?
I'm not a Quinian. So inscrutability of reference is not really my worry.
But you have we have to talk about.
I think you can stipulate. You mean the stuff in the glass. So I'm a Kripkean in this sense. I think that you can just stipulate what you mean. You can say I'm talking about the stuff in the glass. That stuff, and that's clear enough.
The air on the top of it.
The stuff in the glass, and it's
the air on top of it. The clear drinkable water liquid. You know, the light that's shining in it. You know, so you have to tell me, what am I supposed to do some science on?
The stuff in the glass that's also in the lake over there.
But that could also be the shiny stuff that's floating in it. You know what I mean? Or it could be the fish. You know.
Well, no, because there's no fish in my glass. But anyway,
I
don't think I need to functionally define it. And actually, I don't think that its primary intentions are functional definitions. I think if you're a Lewisian, that can be. What they are just functions from states to other states, from truth values, from states from this world considered in a certain way to something else, just a function. So it could be a description that's on one side of the function. It might not be a description that's on one side of the function. So I don't think that is.
I don't think it has to be functional, but it has to be descriptive. Otherwise, it's not clear how we're supposed to. I mean, how we're supposed to do that. Well, this is what I'm saying. I think I mean, I don't know. Maybe this gets into big conversations about our differences in our semantics. because clearly I also am, drawn to the old-fashioned views you were making fun of in the first session.
And we weren't making fun of them.
uh,
I don't take
but
them
yeah,
seriously, though. It is true.
fair enough. But I find it hard to know, just as a practical matter, how the scientist is supposed to move forward, making sense of some phenomena. If you say, well, I've demonstrated it, now do the science on it, they're going to say, okay, I got to get my lab going. Can you tell me what it is I'm supposed to be explaining? And so, for example, of all the other psychological phenomena that you think we have good going sciences about, like attention or memory, um, they have to operationalize what they're talking about. They have to say, here's how we understand, what is attention is in terms that give it something we can explore. And I think that one of the big problems with consciousness research is what we do is we operationalize around verbal report. Now, that's not unsurprising, of course, if you like the TP, but it seems unmotivated.
It would be unsurprising whatever theory you like.
Well, it becomes a confound if you like theories where a person can have consciousness without being aware of it.
Why?
If you can have a conscious state that without being aware of the conscious state, why is it a confound? Because then you don't know if your experiment, which is doing a contrastive methodology to figure out what's going on in the conscious case and what's going on in the unconscious case, whether or not whatever thing you've seen only occurs in the conscious case is actually just correlated with verbal report and not with whatever consciousness is. And that's actually going to transition to like my kind of worry about, and it's going to connect to issues about thinking about infants and so forth. Because like one of the kinds of big criticisms, and then I'm going to have absolutely nothing else to say, other questions because I'm just kind of blathering now. But one of the kinds of criticisms that people have made, like Jonathan Birch in the infant and non-human animal consciousness literature, is that if you have theories of consciousness that are motivated experimentally, where you're just doing this contrastive methodology, and you find some difference in ordinary, normal human adults that, like, whenever they're able to verbally report on this, state, it's got this function, and whenever they can't verbally report on it, it doesn't have this function. You can always wonder whether that's just some quirk of something that's necessary for human consciousness and not for infant or non-human animal consciousness.
Yeah.
And so again, without the TP, I'm just worried that horror is going to face a similar kind of question, which is like, okay, maybe horrors are necessary in normal, or they're correlated with consciousness in normal adult human beings, but they're just not necessary in non-human animals. And what experimental evidence could we get? Do you know what I'm saying? Okay, anyway, so that's one of my biggest questions for you. Yeah.
Okay. Claudia, do you have anything to say about phenomenal consciousness before I start ranting?
No, I have something to say about infants.
Okay, so let me say something about this, and then we'll get to infants after that. But
Okay.
this is very interesting. So I would want to flip it back on you, actually, Jake, and say that you're smuggling in phenomenal consciousness while disavowing it. With this reverse transitivity principle move that you and others make, Josh and David included. So they want to talk about what it's like. And I don't see you denying that kind of talk. And I know David Rosenthal doesn't deny that kind of talk. When we want to explain what it's like for the subject, we appeal to the higher order representations. And that's what consciousness is, a matter of what it's like for you, is a way that often you find higher order theorists of the traditional variety speaking. And phenomenal consciousness just is what it is like. So as I use the term, I said I understand that everyone uses these terms every which way, and I explicitly say you can this territory is so well tread that it's a pulp that you can reconstitute in any which way you want. And I'm stipulating how I'm going to use these terms. And so for phenomenal consciousness, I mean what it's like for you. I mean what I call phenomenal character, or all these phenomenal properties, whatever fancy words you want to use. I just mean what it is like. And when you say a state of which you are not in any way aware is one that's not conscious, what you really mean is there's nothing it's like for you. So that's just
Yeah, I'm
phenomenal.
fine
So
with that.
you're just saying phenomenal consciousness then. You're just saying you're giving a theory of phenomenal consciousness and saying basically, if you're not aware of the state, there is no phenomenal consciousness. And I say that's a proposal for the nature of consciousness. But it is not the defining characteristic of the science of consciousness because it is already put in terms of phenomenal consciousness. It's already saying what we want to explain is what it's like for you. We want to explain this phenomenal subjective, well, as I would put it. So I want to say that phenomenal consciousness has subjective and phenomenal character, where subjective character is the thing that distinguishes conscious states from unconscious states, and the phenomenal character is the specific phenomenologically manifest aspects in the stream of consciousness. And that's what you want to explain too. You just don't want to use those words, and you say, I don't know what you're talking about when you say those things. But then you go on to say the terminologically equivalent things and give an explanation that I recognize as an explanation of the thing that I'm talking about. So I just don't understand how you could say that you don't know what it is we're theorizing about when you are sitting there giving a theory of that very thing, using the same language, and just saying, oh yeah, but it's not the thing we're talking about. So that's how it sounds to me a bit like what you're trying to do. And so I think that the argument you're trying to make is say state consciousness is phenomenal consciousness. And what I want to argue is that state consciousness is distinct from phenomenal consciousness, but that we're both trying to give an account of phenomenal consciousness. Even if you don't want to use that term, I think that's merely a terminological point that is like, stemming from not wanting to use proprietary language that was invented at a different university, given that we come from a separate university, if you know what I'm saying. So we don't want to use the NYU lingo maybe, but I don't think you're describing a different phenomenon. And in fact, it sounds to me like you're just talking about the same stuff. So that's how I would hear what you're saying. I don't see like what you.
Well, so that's the point that we make in the Phil Psych paper from a
Yeah,
couple years back.
I
That
know.
yeah. So I do in some modes want to have a big tent and say, if you've been brought up talking about phenomenal consciousness and defining it in this what it's like way, the higher order view can accommodate that notion if you like, and for publication purposes and so forth, since the terminology of the day, broadly speaking, is this what it's like terminology and phenomenal consciousness terminology, you can't just write a paper without mentioning it or casting things in those terms.
But that's
But I
not
think
fair
that,
though, because this is done. I mean, people were talking this way before that happened. It's because there's something commonsensical here.
well, they would talk about conscious states, um, and it for one thing they weren't distinguished from access conscious and phenomenal conscious. That was what that distinction was initially introduced to distinguish. um, but characterizing conscious states as states for which there's something that it's like.
That's a mistake. No, the phenomenal consciousness, the term phenomenal was introduced to distinguish from access. But the word phenomenal goes back to Kant. It's phenomena of experience as opposed to noumena. The phenomenon is a word that goes back in ancient Greek. This is not a new thing. We're talking about the properties of our experiences. This is just a word to name that thing which has always been there and which you can find people talking about in every tradition. I don't think you can really make this claim that you're trying to make, which is that this is something invented by Ned in 1996 or whenever he wrote that paper, and no one else has ever believed in it until then. It just doesn't seem right to me. That seems
No,
completely
I agree
absurd.
that people have since Kant and before believed in consciousness. There's a notion of consciousness that applies to states. Um, and there are different terms we can use for that. We could call it, if you like, phenomenal consciousness. We could call it, if you like, state consciousness. That's all terminology. There's a question of how do we get a grip on that? What's the common sense description? Because there's the thing, water, and I guess we could call it, I don't know, what's another name for water, like agua, or, other languages. So we could call it lots of different things. Then so there's the term that picks out the thing. Then there's the description of it in common sense terms that lets us have a grip on what it is that we're talking about.
Yeah.
Um, and so I want to distinguish those. So there's phenomenal consciousness, state consciousness, I don't know, consciousness, the experience, whatever you want to call it. And then there's the grip. And your grip, and the grip that's been the grip since Nagel, is what it's like. Um, my claim is that okay, fine, but it's not very informative. It kind of feels close to just like agua. It's like almost like another name rather than an actual description. It gives the vibe, unlike agua, that you're saying more, but I don't know that you're saying much more, and you're certainly not saying enough to ground a theory. It doesn't point to any theory, which is why it's compatible with infinitudes of
But
theories.
that's the whole point. Is, I
Um,
mean, why should, in your way of putting things, the clear drinkable liquid not be compatible with all the different theories? I mean, it should be compatible with
well,
chemistry. It should be
because if I
compatible
tell
with
you a theory, if I'm like,
alchemy. It should be compatible with basic element
well,
theory.
there's gonna be some theories where when you combine the elements, it's not clear, or when you combine the elements, it's not drinkable, or when you combine the elements, it doesn't freeze at a certain temperature.
Right, but my
And
point was
so,
that there's a possible world where water is something alchemical, not involving chemistry, and there's a possible world where water, the clear drinkable liquid, is a simple element with no structure, like Aristotle thought. Those- So
maybe, I mean, this gets into complicated issues about conceivability and so forth, which maybe, I don't know, but set that aside for a second. Fine, maybe I would be happy to grant to you that there are a range of realizers that could realize this common sense description, but not like any.
yeah,
Whereas what it's like gives us no constraints on what a theory could look like. Which is why it can be realized by literally, it could be in your shoes, which is what lots of famous people think. Um,
who's that?
like panpsychists.
Oh, you're lampooning them. Okay, I don't think that's what they think, but they think yes, it could be in the fundamental elements of which
Yeah,
your shoes are composed.
correct.
Okay.
Yeah, because there's no constraints from this description of the phenomena, and so the phenomena is completely untethered from, we don't know what a good explanation would look like. This is why there's a hard problem. However, if there's another description which coincides with what it's like, or is really primary in our driving our thinking about consciousnesses, that that's really what we really think it is,
Mhm.
that could put some constraints on it. And the only other description I've ever heard anybody ever give, as you pointed out, there's two strains, I guess, in history. But I think this strain, and I don't know, I haven't talked to enough scholars because I don't go to conferences as much as I'd like these days. But I haven't talked to any Locke scholars. But my sense is like that the more common way to talk about it in the history of people who have talked about consciousness is this kind of higher order way, which is that if that the states that are conscious are the ones that you are suitably aware that you're in. And that seems to be the only other way that we have into it. So it's at least, in my view, on par with what it's like, if not primary. Like what it's like is like kind of a secondary way of describing it. Seems like a theoretical add-on, which describes the states of which we're aware of ourselves as being in.
Yeah,
Um,
I guess I'd have to understand why you would think that, because if like to segue into the infants, if I see someone, um, you know, I don't doing something horrible to an infant, like burning it with a cigarette, and then
hmm,
laughing when the infant is screaming and crying as a result.
hmm,
Um, when I see something like that, and I think, oh, what the, and I go over there and say, what the hell are you doing? And then someone's like, what's wrong? I'm not doing anything wrong. Well, what's your problem? I think the natural response is you're causing pain. The baby feels pain, it's suffering, and that's
yeah,
wrong to do so. No one says anything about you're causing it to have conscious states. No one says anything like that. They say it feels pain.
hmm,
Okay, so what does that mean to feel pain? Now, I say it means that there's something that is like for you, that from your point of view, it's painful. And that picks out the thing that is morally relevant and gives me reason not to care about the infant. I think there's other things too, by the way. I'm not just a consciousness. I think there's reasons beyond consciousness to care morally about things, but I think consciousness is an important reason to care about things. So, but no one is doing what you said. Oh, that they're in a state and the state is conscious, and that they're just saying they have a feeling and they feel pain. There's a experience that they have, and those ways of talking seem to me to more coincide with the what it's like business than with the conscious state business, because no one mentions states or whether they're conscious. They said there's an experience, there's a feeling. And then it's theorizing to add states and you're aware of it. That's all theorizing. So it just seems to me like you're kind of trying to put it in the reverse order. So the theorizing is the stuff that mentions states. The stuff that mentions what it's like is not theorizing. It is simply pointing to something and saying, what is that?
I mean, I think, and I'm happy to let Claudia jump in here if you want.
Well, but you don't disagree
Yeah.
about like that's a good reason to care about babies, right?
Well,
Yeah,
yeah.
I just have one question that is maybe for both. So this controversy around the transitive principle, does this has any more pragmatical consequence if I endorse one view or the other, or just the way you justify the explanation of the view, or actually change the consequences of the view,
Well,
or
I would say,
changes
first of all,
predictions of the view?
yeah,
Yeah.
if you go Jake's way, then you can rule out by definition phenomenological overflow. It just can't be the case that there is any kind of consciousness that you're not aware of. So, like, Ned's got to be wrong. All those views have got to be wrong. You also are seemingly committed to the existence of unconscious states, the ones that get turned into the conscious states when you become transitively aware of them. So those are two things I think that like are very controversial empirical claims that follow immediately just definitionally from the theory. So which,
Can I
yes.
Can I just say a word on that? So I think that the first one I agree with, that it does rule out overflow. But that's a little bit like saying that I've got a theory, that objects' mass makes their gravitational pull between them. But that rules out that there's, anti-gravity where things with mass don't bend space-time and they just repel, from each other. And yeah, like I'm okay with that. Like, sometimes theories do have empirical consequences, and
But
you could,
definition shouldn't.
well, the phenomenon, properly described, yeah, it's incompatible, or it's like saying I'm ruling out from the get-go that there's water that's pure black and solid at room temperature.
No, it's more like you're ruling out from the get-go that there can't be a non-existent necessary being, so there must be one or something. Like you're defining it into existence and then ruling out all possible counterexamples by
No,
definition.
well, it is true that my common sense characterization of the phenomena, namely that a conscious state's a state you're aware of, does make it the case that we can't discover that there are states that are conscious that we're not aware of.
Exactly.
That's
So you
true.
rule out an empirical question, which shouldn't
Not an
be
empirical
ruled
question.
out.
But that's like saying that it's an empirical question whether there is water that is thick, and black and solid at room temperature.
Of course, it is
We
an
could find it.
empirical question.
Well, I mean, you could find something like that, but it wouldn't be water.
Why wouldn't it?
Why would it?
If it's
I mean, how could it?
H2O,
I think maybe in that condition because you can jiggle things around at different edges of the theory. At that point, maybe we'd get worried that H2O isn't water.
I'm not
So
sure I'm
anyway,
following why. I'm not sure I'm following the proposed counterexample. If you start with some stuff, you find out what it is, and then you find out that same stuff can look different under different conditions, big deal.
sometimes, and then sometimes you decide that actually your initial theoretical account of the phenomena was wrong. So that it can go both ways, depending on
Well, do you have
and
an
lots
example of
of
it going that way?
where we uh, had a description of a phenomena, thought that it was something, discovered that that description applied to things we think fit the common sense description, and so we abandoned that theory. It probably happens all the time, but I'd have to think about it.
No, but where it's the
Um,
same stuff, but we deny,
well, no,
but we
that
say
the
there's two different
theoretical.
kinds of things because it doesn't one. So it's like not like jadeite and nephrite where they're different chemical compositions. You have to find something where it's literally the same physical structure, but you're going to say because in one case it's, well, I guess phenotype or something is not that exact, but the way it manifests is different. And under those conditions, it's a different kind of stuff.
Yeah,
That doesn't
I
seem right to me. I mean, yeah, that's yeah.
no, I'm not saying it was a different type of stuff. I'd say that we'd decide that we were wrong about what the theory was of what the common sense phenomena was. We'd say water is this clear drinkable stuff, and we now theorize that it's H2O. and we discover that there's H2O that's like not clear and drinkable, and not in lakes, it's poison, it kills you immediately, we might think, uh-oh, actually, water isn't H2O. And you're right, I can't off the top of my head think of a good example in the history of science, but I'll probably, tonight at midnight,
Oh,
think
good.
of it.
Email me because I
I'll
would say
email.
in that case
Yeah.
we just found out that water acts weird in those conditions.
Maybe. I mean, this is what I'm saying. I think that it's open in depending on when one's theorizing to go in different directions, depending on a variety of
I
considerations.
mean, so are you thinking of
Um,
places like possible worlds like dry Earth and those kinds of things that people are talking about, or like?
no, I'm just thinking in the ordinary course of scientific theorizing, this probably happens, where we have a theory of something, then we find that the theory applies to something that's completely wildly not what we initially thought we were giving a theory of, and so then we realize, oops, we were wrong about what the what the theoretical explanation is.
Like kind of like string theory and how it gave us a theory of gravity when it was really applied for strong nuclear interactions or something.
Maybe I'd have to think about
Yeah,
that.
I'm
Yeah.
not really sure. I mean,
Well,
anyway, so
to
the
say about
point
that,
here
yeah.
though, the important point the point that I was trying to like bring us back to was that what matters for the theory of consciousness is explaining what it's like. And that if you're not doing that, then you aren't really giving a theory of consciousness. That's what I'm trying to defend.
Yeah,
And
I
so
think
if you're trying to redefine things so that you don't use the P word, then you can do that, but you haven't really successfully avoided talking about the thing under consideration, which is characterized by the P word, phenomenal consciousness.
yeah, I guess I would flip it back around, and I know this is going to sound impossible, but when people deny the TP, to me, it's like somebody asking you, well, couldn't you imagine there's a case of consciousness where there's nothing that it's like? And you would say, impossible, because that's just what I mean by consciousness. And that's what I'm saying the TP gives traditional higher order theorists. It is akin to saying, like, when you're like, well, couldn't
But I
there be a
can
state?
describe one and you can't describe the other.
What can you describe?
I can describe what consciousness would be like absent the TP.
I can describe what consciousness would be like absent what it's like.
How?
So a conscious state would be a state that you're aware of yourself as being in, and there's nothing that it's like to be in. I can easily, there, I said it. It doesn't
um,
happen, but I can say it.
you can say it, but it's
Yeah.
so that's wait, it doesn't happen? What do you mean it doesn't happen?
Well, because I think that if there's any sense to be made of what it's like terminology, it does coincide with the state that you're aware of yourself as being in. It just is another name for the state you're aware of yourself as being in.
So
And
so
so
let me get this straight. Are you saying maybe I'm misunderstanding you because I have trouble with people who want to say things like you're saying. Are you saying you could be an illusionist and still have a higher order theory? That's basically what I hear you saying. Is like you could be an illusionist and still endorse a lot of the things that Richard Brown, say. In which case I'd say, yeah, fine, but don't do it. But are you saying something more than that?
I I don't think I'm saying that at all.
Okay, but
Yeah.
then how are you not saying that? Because if what you say is there's a conscious state, but there's nothing it's like to be in the conscious state, that's illusionism. That's exactly what they say. That is their view. I mean,
Well,
not
I
without the
thought that
higher
they
order
think that
stuff, but
I
that
thought that
there's
they think that there's that there are no conscious states. Isn't
no.
that
Well,
consciousness
it
is an
depends on
illusion? I
the
don't really understand illusionism, so
yeah. What they actually
yeah.
say is what Dennett said, which is that there is consciousness, it's just not what you think it is. And then what Keith has added to that is, yeah, it's not what you think it is, and what you think it is phenomenal consciousness. So
Um,
there's consciousness, but it's not phenomenal consciousness. And then you say, what does that mean? And then people can never figure it out because we all know what we mean. We mean phenomenal consciousness. And when you say not that, no one knows what you're talking about
um, well, not nobody, because there's this whole kind of crew of folks, which is in the minority, I agree.
anymore. Of
Um,
illusionists.
I don't think it's illusionism. I mean, that's a way of begging the question by saying that your common sense characterization of consciousness is the primary one, and that if anybody either wants to accommodate I don't know, in a way you don't like, or doesn't want to make it the primary one, then we don't think there's consciousness. I think you're the illusionist. You're the one who thinks there's this made up thing, phenomenal consciousness, when only there's state consciousness.
Uh-huh.
You know, I think the better thing to say, which is the thing that we said a couple of years ago, is that these notions coincide, right? That
when people are talking about phenomenal consciousness, they're talking about the same thing that the TP is onto. I think that that's the kind of more ecumenical way to bring things together. I'm saying that I could do all the moves that you're making in the more extreme version, where all there is state consciousness, you're the illusionist. The definition of consciousness, which is state consciousness, is a state you're aware of. Phenomenal consciousness, I don't know what that is. Like, that could be true, maybe not true, whatever. I don't want to do that. I'd rather have the state and phenomenal coincide.
Yeah,
What I'm
but that's
worried
an
about is
empirical claim. That's all that I'm
Okay.
saying.
Okay, last point from Richard.
Yeah.
fair enough. And then, yeah. Oh, I
Oh,
was going to say, though, that I don't think that the TP commits you to the existence of non-conscious states. I do believe that they exist. But you said that the TP goes out on these limbs that make it questionable.
yeah. It is
Takes
committed
stand.
to that, though, because it's in the definition that a state of which you are not aware is not a conscious state. So there must be states of which you are not aware.
But those states don't have to be mental, right? So it could
But then
be
you
that if
wouldn't
you're
be aware of that state later. It's got to be the thing of which you are aware, which is the same in both cases in order for this TP to work the way you want it to work.
I mean, to go into things that will make the view even sound more unappealing.
Yeah. No, I
I
like
think
it. Tie yourself up.
it, the state is a conscious state is a state that it seems to you that you're in. So it doesn't entail that those states do or ever have to exist. Now they do, I think, typically, and I think that they are mental, and I do think they exist. But I don't think I don't think that the TP version of the higher order view automatically commits you to the existence of non-conscious mental states. It could be that, as you claim, whenever there's consciousness, there's uh, awareness of states, awareness of oneself being in states. And it could be that none of the states that you're aware of yourself as being in are actually mental states. I mean, that's compatible with the traditional TP. I don't think it's right.
Wait, no, that's not. So the traditional TP starts with the idea that a mental state, a state you're not aware of yourself as, that you have no awareness of, is not a conscious state.
So a state's conscious only if you're aware of yourself as being in
That's
it.
the contrapositive. But the
Right.
other way of putting it is that if there's a state that you're not aware of, then it's not conscious. And the transitivity principle commits you to the claim that you can turn that state into a conscious state by becoming aware of it.
So I think that's that is a way that people describe it, but I think it's a little misleading because I don't think there's any turning. I mean, I'm a non-relationalist like you are. So I don't think that the first order state gets modulated in any way, or
No,
even
I
has to.
agree, but there is still a turning in a sense that the answer to the question which state is conscious is the first order one. So
Well, yeah, it's the state that you're aware of yourself as being in.
right.
Yeah. Because I think that conscious, that term functions more like apparent or appears. It's the apparent state. And so,
Yeah.
yeah. But
I
an
don't see
apparent,
this as an objection to my view as opposed to a
it's not an objection. I'm just
postulation
saying,
of an alternative view that I call
yeah,
the traditional higher order approach.
that's what I meant. I was just trying to defend the traditional higher order approach. You were saying here are some criticisms of it, that it commits you to all these things that are questionable empirical claims.
But it
And
does commit you to those.
well, that's what I'm trying to deny. I'm trying to say that it does commit you to denying overflow.
Which
But
is
I don't think
questionable.
but for reasons I don't think so. But I don't think it commits you to the existence of non-conscious states. I do think it fits nicely with that and is compatible with that, and I think it's true. But it doesn't. I disagree with that one as a criticism. That was my point.
You
So yes,
can't
I was
really,
defending.
I would still push back that you can't really make sense of the transitivity principle without it.
Okay.
And furthermore, that if you look at the work from David, it's pretty clear that he has an argument for the transitivity principle based on this idea. I would say that the mental state of which you are aware is the same one which shows up unconsciously during priming.
Yes, I do believe. I think
and
that the
so-
theory says that that's true. Yeah.
Yeah, and no, but it's more than that. The theory says it's true. It's the transitivity principle commits you to it. So
That I didn't.
yeah. But anyway, so I think the main thing I would want to say is that I don't think anything has. So the science of consciousness had better explain what it's like to be me. or to be an infant, or to be a dog. And if it can't do that, then I don't want to play anymore. I have other things I'd rather be doing. And if you think that you can say, you can have a theory of consciousness without doing that, then I don't respectfully believe that you're being sincere or taking seriously the first person data. So I can never honestly, sincerely believe a person who says, I don't know what you mean when you say what it's like, because they're having an experience at that moment. So how could they not know? All they need to do is be themselves. That's it. It's just that. So I always find it disingenuous, like literally, honestly, a kind of weasel move to suddenly start saying, we don't know what you're talking about, and oh, it could be. It's like, this is, in some sense, the most important, most apparent, most directly right in front of your face thing that we could ever encounter, the nature of our own conscious experience. And I don't know if you need to take some DMT or go on a vision quest or what, but man, it's like very obvious that we are having these, what seemingly are direct, immediate encounters with these things. Anyway, so I find it very, I honestly can't really take seriously this as more than a rhetorical move, whereby the person is trying to say, I don't want to be trapped in this first person methodology because I want to say physicalism. And I like physicalism, but I can't deny the existence of consciousness. I can't take that seriously. So,
but, I mean, but you could say everything you've said in my terminology,
but
too.
you can't, unless we mean the same thing.
Well, I can say it in your term. There's nothing. I have consciousness, and I know that I have consciousness, and every time I look inside, I know that there are states that I'm aware of. In fact, what else am I reporting on other than the states that I'm aware of? And so there are these conscious states, and they're the states I'm aware of. And I can tell you about.
I knew I was conscious before I ever heard the word state. I would never have used the word state.
Okay, this is a very, very good moment to move on from the infants.
Okay, let's bring them infants in. Yes, because believe it or not, we're progressing in time.
If infants know what is a state.
Yeah, they don't know what a state is, exactly.
If they have the concept of a state. Yeah, okay, I think it was very good because at least you both really managed to state what is the disagreement in the very end. Okay.
Yeah. And I like
Jake
this
is not
I don't
completely satisfied, but
I'm not,
maybe we need a conference on the transitive principle actually.
Yes, that would be great.
Yeah. Okay, so maybe we should move on from the developmental tensions, and I think maybe some of the questions that you're discussing will come back.
Yeah, I agree.
Yeah. So, do you want to start, Jake, or should I start?
You can go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah. So one thing that is important to say is that, okay, the book is not actually, you don't have a chapter on infant consciousness. So it's not about, so the questions, the developmental tensions I will bring to the discussion is more related to, okay, so this is the horror view you're defending. What are the consequences of the view? And actually, if actually the view could accommodate infant consciousness. So it's more in this spirit, and I will try to press you into requirements and one point of the view, maybe 3 points that maybe be problematic for infant consciousness, and see what you have to say about this. And Jake, feel free to just jump into the 3 points if you have something more to say. So I think maybe the 3 points is the concepts, the conceptual content requirement, the self component, and the fact that the view does not allow any gradation. Okay, so either you have the high order state or don't have. So I think those 3 points might create some problems for accommodate any developmental view of consciousness. And what is interesting is that in the high order theories as a whole, there are other versions of the high order views that you could accept that you would not have the same problem, but you want to have one version of the view that might raises more strong problem for the case of infant consciousness. But I know that you actually want to accommodate them. So I'll just bring those points to see how you would accommodate them in those cases, okay? Yeah, so the first, so those are 3 points together is related to how the view maybe be committed with some kind of adult linguistic condition, okay? And if you are committed with this, you might this might be a problem for infant consciousness. So first one, the conceptual content requirement, and maybe this allows you also to say a little bit more about your exchange with an ad block and the color concept. You have this in a footnote. So you insist to say that Horo deploy concepts, okay? So the concepts of seeing, perceptual red, or being a state, and we know from developmental psychology that some of those concepts will arrive very late in development, okay? At least the first year, the second year. So maybe some of the concepts that it seems that the view imply might not be available for infants. Okay? So one idea, if I well understood in the discussion of the color discrimination, that maybe it's one place where you discuss this, what would be available for infants would be a kind of a general concept, okay? So even if the infants could not have the discriminative concept of color, of that shade of red, they would have like concept of color, or concept of seeing. And I think this, and as Ned point, this is contested by developmental psychology. Seems that they are not implying any color concept before 6 months, and these will rule out consciousness in early stages. And even if you appeal, okay, they don't have the concept of color, they have the concept of seeing, it seems to me harder to claim this. Maybe infants has, I don't know, if they have some very basic primitive concept, I don't know, this object, this, it would be hard for me to think that they have like seeing as a concept or a general concept of color. Actually, I think this comes really later. Probably they have more concepts related to objects they are seeing, and then just later more general concepts emerge. Because the general concept would require more abstraction, like the concept that I'm seeing things, seems to require much more abstraction than just the concept of this. And among the higher order theories are one view, Rocco Gennaro's view, that have this primitive concept. Maybe the first concept is this pain, a kind of a demonstrative concept. That seems to me more plausible than the view you're holding. Yeah, so the question is, what do you think about this, or how you could accommodate infant consciousness with these more abstract concepts, the interaction with the specific discussion on color concept, and why not adopt a more that would be available for high order views, some more simpler view as you start with a very basic demonstrative concept of things that Rocco Gennaro's view endorse. I'm saying that because in my infant our infant consciousness paper, I want to accommodate high order views as one view that could allow for infant consciousness in the in early stages, but the horror view make things harder, so to speak. Okay, yeah, I just want to hear you on this, and I don't know if Jake has any things to add on this point.
Well, let's hear what Richard has to say about this, and then.
Yeah,
Okay. Sorry, I keep looking around. My wedding ring fell off my finger, and it fell on the ground, and I don't know where it went. So I'm trying to find it. But anyway, it's got to be in here somewhere. Anyway.
Yeah, you found it. You found it.
I
My husband lost this in the ocean, so he never found.
Oh wow, yeah, okay. Well, yes. I almost did that on our honeymoon. I was in the jacuzzi and it came off, and then I had to have everyone in the jacuzzi like filling around with their feet.
I lost mine
Anyway,
in a winter glove and couldn't find it for like 6 years, but then pulled this old glove out and it was in the glove.
oh
Oh,
wow.
fantastic.
Okay.
Crazy. Yeah, so now I have two.
Okay. So now for the 3 points about infants. So first of all, I do think infants are conscious. I kind of think that naively, commonsensically, it's hard to deny, especially since I've had kids. But even before then, I think it's hard to deny. I think you could, and you know, I teach this class with Tony Rowe, a neuroscientist, at the Graduate Center, the Neuroscience and Philosophy of Consciousness. We just were talking about this 2 weeks ago. He's very skeptical about infant consciousness, and he's a neuroscientist. So I think there is room for skepticism, and there are people who still are skeptics. But I don't really think of myself as someone who shares that skepticism. Okay, so that's the first thing to say is, yes, I do want to accommodate the intuition, and I don't want to be someone like Peter Carruthers, who just says, yeah, so what? That's the view. Okay, so there are versions of higher order theory, I think, where it's going to come out as an implication of the theory that infants of a certain range don't have conscious experience. I think possibly the traditional higher order thought theory is one of them. So I'd be curious to hear what Jake has to say about this. But I think there are innate concepts, so that there could be a core set of innate concepts. And the self is a good candidate for one of those concepts, which is innate, a primitive version of the self. Maybe a stripped down version of just this clump of cells, this body, this thing. So I think something like that is innate, probably. It's very sketchy because it's hard to test, but I think there's some reason to think that this could be the case. In which case, then, it wouldn't be so hard to think that there's some very low level higher representation as of, there's a me, there's something. But also, I think that there is a possibility of what I call a selfless horror, which is just a kind of, instead of I am seeing red, it's a kind of there's red, but not attributing to any self. So I do think that that's a possibility for infant consciousness, that maybe they just have that the concept, if the concept of the self is not there, then possibly they're just kind of having experiences that are free floating in a sense of redness here, blueness there, sound over there. And then it kind of coalesces maybe around the center once they start representing themselves as a distinct thing. I don't know, there's speculations. But I do think that there's a possibility for a selfless horror. And I think that Rosenthal has argued against the idea and saying you need to have the I concept in the higher thought. I think the argument fails for reasons that I say in the book, but basically because I have pointer contents that allow some connection. So you could say who states they are, even if there's no I content in there. Anyway, so I do think that's a possibility. I think maybe there's a primitive self, maybe there's no self, but instead some kind of selfless representation of something going on. It is going to involve demonstratives. And I think just that there's got to be some sense in which these concepts are easy to acquire, because like the concept of seeing, for example, in the kind of concept that's going to show up in a higher order state that I'm talking about is not going to be the same concept that you get when you're walking around saying like, oh, I see that thing over there. It's going to be a special concept showing up only in these specialized states. In which case, I think just visual activity alone is going to be wired up in the brain, probably in the way to just lead to having these concepts be acquired. So I would speculate that it's not difficult to acquire these concepts, like seeing, or perceptible red, at a primitive, very vague level. So I do think that development consciousness develops in terms of specificity, in terms of generality, etc. So you start off with a kind of vague, blooming, buzzing confusion, which maybe is a way to make sense of what Alan Sugabnik talks about, right? just like, a bunch of stuff hopping around everywhere, and then it kind of trends into this point of view. That's one possibility. But none of these are like out of line with the horror theory. It just says that they would, empirically, it could be disconfirmed if you could show that infants have no way of having these kinds of higher order states. But we don't know what in the brain would count as having these higher order states. They have underdeveloped prefrontal cortexes. Sure, that's true. They don't have zero prefrontal cortex, at least, to a certain extent. They have an analog of it, a developmental precursor of it. There's other cortical areas that may be important. The allocortex is around the hippocampus and these other areas, the entorhinal cortex. So there are various, and maybe, so this is an idea that comes from Joe Ledoux, maybe you have higher order representations that are very vague and general at these lower cortical levels, and then once the cortex develops, it takes over, supersedes with all the detail that it can provide. But maybe at the lower level, it's these subcortical cortex. These not subcortical, but allocortical areas that are relevant. These are all open, I would say, and should be explored. So, maybe you're going to say this leads back to the unfalsifiability claims, and maybe, but I would want to explore those as issues. So, and then about concepts, I would say, if you want to define concepts in such a way that it's impossible for infants to have it, then I think that's kind of cheating, and that there are, there are reasons for thinking that you could have concepts like this. So my response to the Block article is that they may have visual concepts, but not concepts of color. So they may be saying, I'm simply seeing a dark square. I'm having a visual experience. So they would have to have some kind of concept of the visual thing. I agree, that some vague concept of that. But I just don't see how that would be difficult to acquire, given that they are using their eyes so much. And so one possible hypothesis is the one that David has, which is that they've got to figure out like where these sensory qualities are coming from. So in the early stages of their development, they're kind of going, is this quality coming from my eyes or from my ear? So that they're trying to calibrate the senses in a way, might be a way that they just pick up these concepts by trying to sort the sensory qualities. So something's going on at these early stages of development, and I don't see why that couldn't be part of the story. So partially, I'd say some innate concepts, some early acquired vague concepts that become more precise and filled in as time goes by, but start off kind of vague in general. So while the higher order state being there or not is yes or no, the content that it has can be very vague, very sparse, very abstract, very general, and can become specified, or vice versa, depending on like the details. So I just think that you can't prejudge the issue, that you've got to figure out some way of empirically looking to see whether or not these things are the case. And you can't simply say, oh, it doesn't seem like it has concepts. Anyway, so yeah, I think that the issue is complicated, but I guess if I found out that if you could conclusively prove that infants lacked all of these things of which I was saying, then I would say, oh yeah, it's too bad for the higher order theory. Because I would not say, oh yeah, therefore infants are not conscious. So the only way I would get to that point is if you confirm the higher order theory beyond a doubt in typical cases. Then I would say if it's well confirmed, you could trust it in these hard cases. Otherwise, common sense should supersede it. So I think it's a complicated issue here, and that's why starting with infants is a little bit the wrong way to start, I would say. You want to start with regular humans, try to find a well-confirmed theory, then see what those theories say about the other cases. Yeah, anyway, so I don't know if that's something you guys want to talk about yet or not.
Yeah, just one point about the self component. So yes, in the book you actually give room for selfless horror. Although you said your preferred view is one with a self component, but then if you remove the requirement of the self component, I don't know what is. I think maybe you remove what is a specific of horror. So it seems horror collapse in other views. So I don't know how you can have horror a selfless component horror, a horror that there is no self-content, without self-content. It seems very, very close to other views. So,
well, which other views? Like first order views?
Even first order view. So there is no requirement for a self-concept. And if you allow for non-conceptual concept, non-conceptual content, then the view really become a first order view. Okay.
Well, I think that the higher order part is capturing the fact that what you're representing is another mental state. So not the fact that you're representing the self. Although I agree that the way that the traditional higher order theory is put forward is that, like, the transitivity principle is often stated as I'm aware of myself as being in this state. So they take the self as the primary object of representation, so to speak. And
I thought also the self was doing the individuating work.
The what?
For that state. It was individuating the state, the self component. I am in this state.
Yeah, well, that's why I prefer that view, but I think that you could have just that there is that state. And then what it would be like is like no one was in the state, but there it was. So maybe I'm misunderstanding what the objection is, but the selfless horror is supposed to just be there's a higher order representation, which is a representation of another mental state, but you're not attributing it to yourself so that it doesn't appear as though it belongs to you. It just appears, and I try to tell the story about like cases of somatoparaphernia, where this famous case of the woman who claims that her arm is not her own, and that when you touch her arm, you're really touching her niece's arm. And when she closes her eyes and you touch her arm, you say, I'm touching her arm. She says, I don't feel anything. But when you say, I'm going to touch your niece's arm, then she says, oh, I feel it. And she says, I feel the touch on my niece's arm. So now in that case, is she representing, like, so Rosenthal has an interpretation of that as though she's representing that I myself have had an experience of someone else's, the arm over there. But I think it's also possible that she's having an experience of not being me, being her niece, that her niece is having the experience. And so what it's like for her is that it's on the niece's arm. And that the I content is not in the higher order state, but rather that the niece is there playing that role in some sense. So yeah, I don't really think that you need to have the I component that is strictly required necessary in order to have a higher order representation. It just seems to me.
Yeah, I think maybe the objection is those things in isolation might not have the force of the objection, but if you put everything together, so you remove this self-content component, you make the concept very thin, very, very basic. Is the sparse description of the baby. So then if you put all this together, it's almost a first order view. So just like everything together make the horror less compelling in the infant case, just like maybe the objection is more this, how the horror with all the horribly argument can actually accommodate infant. Maybe to accommodate infant, you kind of remove everything that in your own.
What was
Sorry.
Is you?
That was you, Jake? Oh, that scared me. Okay.
Sorry about that.
Yeah, all this makes everything that you said you care about in the view. You use this expression. You care about in the view that makes you see the view as compelling, become less compelling to accommodate infants. Yeah, just maybe the point would be more this. And I can also bring the fact that the view does not give room for, makes room for any gradation. So either the infants are conscious or is not conscious. There is no room for those. Either infants have the architecture for high order thoughts, or there is no gradual emergence of those abilities. Either the abilities there or not.
I mean, I guess I do think of phenomenal consciousness as a binary thing, which is either there or isn't there. And I don't really know how to make sense of gradualist views about phenomenal consciousness that truly take it to be a gradable property such that there could be partial phenomenal consciousness or sort of phenomenal consciousness or kind of something that it's like to be me, or only indeterminately be the case that there's something that is like. I find it very mysterious and puzzling for those kinds of views. Instead, what I think that I can make sense of is that there either is or isn't something that is like to be me, but what it's like can be sometimes very vague and degenerative and sparse and spread out and not nailed down. So that's almost like the kind of sort of being conscious stuff that they were talking about, except now you're definitely conscious, except in this, what's definitely conscious is vague. So that seems to me to be something I can make sense of, but the kind of true gradualist thing, I don't know how to make sense of. So I guess I would say I do want it to be the case that the infant's either phenomenally conscious or not. And it does seem to me the follow from how we set things up that it's got to be that way. As a matter of metaphysics, of reality, that the infant either has an experience or doesn't. There either is something it's like or there isn't. So yeah, I don't think that as I don't think of that as a flaw in the view. I think of that as like, that's how I think of phenomenal consciousness. So it's got to be that way. So I see it as a plus that the view accommodates that. On the other hand, I see it also that the infant is probably going to have some very far removed sense of consciousness from what I have. In which case, I want to accommodate this kind of generic, sparse, spread out, vague thing, and I would do it in the way we have been talking about by, and then you say, well, gee, haven't you given up everything that the horror thinks is important? And I would say not necessarily, because what the view says is simply that there's a higher order representation, and that's what phenomenal consciousness is. And whatever the content of that representation is what you are experiencing. So in this case, that's still going to be the case. It's just that the content of the higher representation is going to be just, there's some vague stuff happening down there. Something sort of seeing like is happening. So that will develop over time and become more precisified as the infant. So I see the story as being just the what you would predict. It's just, and I haven't given up anything that makes horror distinctive, because what makes it distinctive is just the claim that it's the higher order representation, which is phenomenally conscious. That's really the only thing that I think of as like the important part of my view. That it's the higher order representation, which is phenomenally conscious. And then what is that higher representation? Well, we have to figure that out. So the atomistic version of it is a version where maybe there's just like, it's just a global state in some sense that you can't break apart, that doesn't have components. And maybe it's different for each individual conscious experience, in which case, it might be, in the infant's case, some just determinate, but having vague content, determinate state. In which case, yeah, so I don't really see the force of the objection, I guess, in the case of me giving up anything. I'm giving up things that make my experience the way it is now, but I wouldn't expect them to be present in the infant case. So it doesn't seem like I'm giving anything up.
Yeah, just using your own terminology, I think if I well understood the phenomenally active and passive content,
Yeah,
I think maybe if I remove all this and make the things very simple for infants, I think in the end, in the infant version of horror, you end up with no phenomenal active self-content, a kind of a minimal descriptive content, I don't know, pointing to a first order state. And I think this is very close to maybe what the first order theory would say about infants. So this is more like the force of objection, more all this together. But I could put this, maybe I could put a different challenge for the view. Okay. maybe one challenge is, can you identify a kind of empirical functional criteria that could tell us, okay, this is infants are conscious of this. Their consciousness is here now. As for instance, the recurrent process view has some criteria, or a global workspace view has a criteria. So what would be, if I want to use higher order theories for generate predictions of when consciousness emerges in development, what would be the marker? So what the view would say, okay, here it is. I'm testing the view. This is the marker for consciousness.
Yeah, I think that's a good question. I don't think we know the answer to that question. And in a one way, I would say the book is my quest to try to figure out what could be an answer. But I don't know. I kind of ended up saying we're in the process of still trying to figure it out. So I don't think it's a good place to start with the infants. I think that's where we want to end up. But I don't think we can say anything right now about what would count in the infant case.
Yeah, it's true. But I think the other views, there is a lot of discussion this in the infant consciousness literature. They also start with the adult case. The global workspace view generated their markers, the P300, from the adult case.
Yeah.
But they generate some predictions, even if you think that the markers are adult-centric markers. But they generate predictions for when consciousness might emerge during development. And I think the higher order view, I don't know, I agree with you that maybe this is a future development of the view.
Yeah.
So far, they don't have like, okay, where consciousness actually starts. Only if you get more views that require more sophisticated cognitive apparatus, like, as you mentioned, Peter Karater's view.
Yeah.
That would like make predictions based in the cognitive architecture that emerge at certain point in development. But apart from those views,
well, this I agree.
Yeah,
with
I don't know
you,
if Jake, in his defense of animal consciousness, and has a marker that comes from higher order views.
Well, just before Jake gives us the answer, let me just poison the well a little bit, because I do think that this is exactly right. But those guys have a head start on us, like global workspace theory and these other guys have a head start in the sense that the theories were developed by scientists. The markers were built in at the beginning, so to speak, whereas the higher order view was developed by philosophers. And we've had real trouble trying to translate it into empirical, testable ideas. And we're only just now beginning to figure out what would be or wouldn't be the markers of higher order states. For example, we still have this confound about behavior, about performance of the task, and whether or not you can say, because a person can press a button or not, that indicates that they did or didn't see the thing, or consciously or not. So we have a lot of these issues still to work out. And the higher order theories are the most complicated of all these theories and the most psychological of all of them. So it's very hard to develop these markers. But that's just because we haven't done it yet. We've only been, in my mind, it's really started like in 2010. So it's been 15 years or so since people have really tried. I mean, I'm talking about when Hawkwan and David Roosevelt wrote.
Yeah, I thought about Hawkwan's view. So the pointer structure, when does the pointer emerge in development? So even if the more the theories that are grounded in neuroscience, I think this is a challenge even for the more neuroscientific views of higher order theories.
I agree, because there's not a lot of work which has been done. It's only beginning to be done. So I agree. This is where we want to develop the idea, is to find out when these things do come online, these processes that we're appealing to, because that would greatly enhance our ability to answer these questions. But I don't think it's a ding against the theory to say you can't do it yet, but these guys can, because they started from a different position. So that I would just say we haven't caught up to them yet, but that's where we're working towards. Jake, did you want to add anything to that?
There's a lot said. I don't know. I mean, I have my own views about this kind of stuff. I think that maybe in some ways horror is in somewhat of an easier and somewhat of a harder position to make predictions about what the markers might be,
Hmm.
because on like the kind of traditional view that I kind of am inclined towards, I think that the evidence that a non-verbal organism has the relevant higher order states is going to be like piecemeal the kind of evidence that they just have the relevant concepts. Like, can they pass tests that show that they have any self-awareness, like the mirror test or something like that? And then can they exhibit behaviors that indicate that they're capable of making mental state attributions? So, like, do they seem to not just track other organisms' eyes, but do they seem to be able to track what they're perceiving? In their sophisticated tests in the cognitive ethological literature with, for animals, about whether or not animals are tracking more than just like gaze, but in addition, like perception or and so I think like that those literatures on the evidence of nonverbal self-awareness and nonverbal tracking of mental state attributions, like you can kind of use those to triangulate to when human infants might have it. But for my part, I do think it's unlikely that infants are going to exhibit those markers until pretty late in development, which would obviously, and Richard, if you're starting with the assumption that, or like it's like a bedrock thing that infants better have consciousness like from birth, then I'd be, it looks like hot theory's false, traditional higher theory is false. Um,
I'd say from before birth.
right. So yeah, whereas with horror, like I guess I don't know. It's harder to know what the kinds of relevant types of analog experiments would look like for these kinds of pointer awareness that isn't necessarily self-representation of the sort of full-fledged type that the traditional view holds. Or even, I mean, you still think that mental state attribution is necessary. So whatever the evidence is that nonverbal organisms are making mental state attributions to other organisms, would I think be like kind of evidence that would show that nonverbal human beings are making those attributions maybe to themselves.
Yeah.
Um, but I'm pretty skeptical that infants are going to pass any of those tests. Um, but I guess I'm inclined to not think it's such a big deal that maybe infants aren't conscious for at least a little while. I don't want to prejudge the issue. Like, you've been saying throughout this, Richard, that you're like a lot of these things are empirical issues. Like, I kind of feel like it's an empirical issue, and I don't want to prejudge. Like, maybe I'm more with Tony that, I don't know.
Hmm.
But part of the reason why I'm not so bothered by that is that I do think that full-fledged mentality can occur unconsciously. So this is a point of disagreement. One question I have for you, actually, but you don't deny that there are functionally equivalent states that an organism can be in that are like, we just don't want to call them perceiving or feeling pain or um, I don't know, thinking on your view if you're not having the horror about them. But see, I guess I just, we could argue about whether that's a good idea or not. But if you think that that's okay, I think it's quite plausible that, I mean, I think it's undeniable. What's undeniable is that infants are in those states. And I think that those states can ground welfare. I actually have a paper coming out with Joe Gottlieb and Bob Fisher. It's going to be in Utilitas, where we basically make this argument that we think that, like, you know, if you think pain can be unconscious, which I know that makes a lot of people their heads explode, but I do think it's pretty reasonable, or at least there's functionally equivalent states of pain.
Yeah.
That can ground welfare subjectivity. And so I think you still have reason not to harm infants and good reason to think that they're, moral patients and so on and so forth. Uh, and so for my part, I kind of feel like one of the good things about the traditional higher order theory is it makes this question of when does consciousness arise like a lot less important. Because what's more important, I guess, is when does mentality arise? And that I think is obviously in utero. You know what I mean? Um, and we have good reason to think that infants, are thinking and in pain. Whether those pains and thinkings are conscious is, I think, an additional question, which is very challenging, and I think, probably comes online pretty quickly. But I don't know. My inclination is to think that it may not be right at birth. Although, you've convinced me over the years that maybe like my worries about nativism are less well placed. And if there are innate concepts, then I guess I'd be skeptical that there's actually any good experimental evidence that infants exhibit any of the relevant things that would suggest that they have the higher order representations at birth. But pretty quickly they do develop them. Um, Yeah, so that's a couple of scattershot thoughts about that. So I guess one question I have for you is, yeah, like you're not opposed to thinking that there is the functional equivalent states non-consciously.
I'm not opposed to it. I'm not opposed to even saying that they are unconscious states. I just don't think it's required in order to have a higher order theory.
Okay, but if you don't,
Because
but if
I've heard, I mean, when we went to Taipei and presented at that conference, and I presented an early version of the same things I'm saying, because I've only been saying that Claudia said it nicer, but I've been saying the same thing for like 10, 15, 20 years. I mean, we'll talk about your one-trick ponies. I've been playing this trick to death. So, but I was there in Taiwan, and David was there, Rosenthal, and I was saying higher order theories are the ones, and there's a recording of this online. I was saying higher order theories are the ones that invoke inner awareness. And during the question period, David said, no, higher order theories are ones that posit unconscious mental states. That's what higher order theories are. And I was like, no. And he was like, yes. So I sort of do think, and what you just said right now, that unconscious mentality obviously exists, does seem to be a corollary of those kinds of things, whereby one is assuming that there are these unconscious mental states. So anyway, I just want to point that out, that it does seem to me to be an important issue about how you define and what you are committed to in respect of these questions about higher order theory. So
I find that so puzzling that David said that, because it seems to me that like a tremendous number of first order theories are totally compatible with non-conscious mentality in the full-fledged, whatever person level, whatever.
Well, I see it as a flagship argument of his that only higher order theories can explain the difference between a conscious and unconscious state. That's always been an argument of his, and it's a corollary of this.
That I don't know. Maybe I think that maybe reading him as saying they can only they can explain it like adequately or correctly or something like that. You know what I mean? But like I think a lot of theories, at least on their face, are like, think about global workspace theory. Like the information is either in the global workspace or it's not. If it's not, then you're unconsciously perceiving, but it's still perceiving. Right. It's just not in the global work. It just didn't make it to the global workspace, so it's not conscious perceiving. Or if you are a recurrent processing person, maybe you could say, you've got the non-recurrent processing, and that's subliminal perception, and then when it gets recurrently processed, then it's conscious perception.
Yeah.
Or think about, various versions of first order representationalism, like, classic Thai style panic theory. You've just got the anic, the poised abstract non-conceptual content. When it's not poised, you've just got the abstract non-conceptual content.
Yeah.
Then that could just be subliminal perception. And I don't know if any of these theorists like that. But it just seems to me that the theories lend themselves nicely, or at least, have resources to accommodate the existence of non-consciousness.
I agree.
Now, I don't think that poisedness is the right explanation of consciousness. I think it's a higher order thing. But, that's arguing about whether the theory is a good theory or not.
Yeah. You mentioned, Gottlieb mentioned ago, but he has a nice paper called The Collapse Argument where he makes that point about poisedness.
Yeah.
Yeah, so I think these issues are interesting and important. But with respect to infant consciousness, I mean, so I guess the only thing that I am concerned to try to establish is oftentimes you will find people in the literature saying higher order theories are late theories. They are committed to consciousness showing up late in development.
Yeah.
And I don't think that's right. I think that higher order theories could be early theories, as early as you like.
Sure. They could be native. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. So that was only the that's my main thing, is that there is a view out there where you could say, yeah, higher order theories apply to infants. Now, is it plausible empirically? How do you test it? I think all those questions are very difficult. But I just don't think that you can say, oh, infants are conscious, therefore higher order theories are false. It can't be that simple. There has to be some more, and I think the types of things that Claudia has been bringing up are the things you would want to point out, namely, like, do they have concepts? How are they representing their mental states? So those are good empirical questions, but I don't think that we have decisively shown that this can't be the case.
Agreed.
So that was my basic response to Claudia's question, was that I don't know if there's a lot of evidence for it, but I don't think there's any strict evidence against it.
Yeah, no, that sounds right to me.
I just want to, maybe this is more for Jake than for Richard.
I'll take a break. Yes.
Yeah, no, not take a break at all. Maybe it's more in agreement with some of your points, and maybe
Now I'm
challenge
in the
some
hot
of.
seat. Okay.
But yeah, so I totally accept that you might have unconscious perception, and I think this is what is interesting in the case of infants. Just the behavior expression, you might not know whether the behavior indicates that they are perceiving or feeling pain consciously, or if there is any unconscious perception. And I totally agree that welfare subjects are not just grounded on consciousness. So you can have welfare subjects that are related to other criteria that might be relevant to make decisions. So even if I might not feeling consciously pain, I might still be required to avoid me to feel pain, because this might affect me physically and my future interest. But that said, I think it's very relevant for ethical purpose to know whether neonates are feeling conscious pain or not, because it matters whether we are relieving pain from them or not, the way we treat them.
Well, shouldn't you relieve
So-
unconscious pain too?
Yeah, see, I think it matters whether you relieve the pain. Yeah, exactly.
Even if we have to relieve unconscious pain, because maybe can affect physically the system, so maybe it might be bad for the system, and being that distress that is not that has no mental representation, but maybe might be bad for the system itself. So it might have other reasons to, but it matters a lot whether they're feeling conscious pain or not for ethical purpose. I would make a hierarchy that the gold standard for protection would be like phenomenal consciousness. The other things are relevant with phenomenal consciousness would be like golden star for protection. For in the case, yeah, in that case. So it matters whether they are feeling, whether the pain is feeling conscious pain or not. And in the Horo view, the first order state does not fix the phenomenology. So I need the higher order structure to fix the phenomenology. And if they don't have the higher order structure, the consequence of the view is that there is no phenomenal conscious pain in that case. So it matters to know whether that the view actually generates some predictions of when the high order structure.
I mean, that's a good question.
Generated.
Before you respond, Jake, I want to ask, do you think that adding the conscious aspect of pain makes it worse?
Yeah. So this is something that I address, that Joe and I talk about in this paper. Like, this is like one of the big things. So we controversially say no.
Oh no.
Oh no.
Yeah, come on, man.
Yeah, the pain. What's bad is the pain, and the pain. And I think we could talk about, how people use terms like feels and hurts and things like that. But sometimes I think that that's used in a phenomenal way, but I think that it can also be construed in a non-phenomenal way. So like a pain can hurt when you're in the pain, and what is it for it to hurt? There's debate about how to unpack that, but I think it's broadly speaking going to be unpacked functionally. And then it can consciously hurt. And what does that mean? It means it hurts, and you're aware of yourself as being in the hurting. But what's bad for you is the hurting, not the being aware of yourself as being in the hurting. And so the pain, what's bad about the pain and what gives you the impetus to take it away is it's being a pain, not that that you're being aware of yourself as being in it. And I agree that I recognize that this is very controversial, which is why we have to spend 20 pages, arguing for it, and I'm sure we'll convince no one. But yeah, we make the paper's kind of broken into two parts. One is arguing that pains being conscious isn't necessary, or pain or pleasure being conscious isn't necessary for a subject to be a welfare subject. And then the second part of the paper is arguing that it's the consciousness doesn't even modulate the subject's welfare status. Yeah, so I bite that bullet. I know that's not going to sound good to you. I mean, we got some arguments for it. I could send you the paper if you like.
Yeah, so I guess then what you're saying to Claudia basically is that it's the unconscious pain that matters. And whether it's conscious or not, that's the thing that matters. Is that
this is a weird consequence of the film.
Yeah, it's not I didn't say that here. That's Jake.
In my case, I think I would what matter is not the pain I might have when I was anesthetized, but maybe the pain I have when I'm not anesthetized.
Well, so
Well, that's different
anesthesia
though.
is ambiguous, yeah. So that could be removing the creature consciousness, but leaving the state's nature intact. And so you could be anesthetized and have a conscious pain, or you could be anesthetized and have an unconscious pain, at least on my taxonomy of how things work. Um, or the anesthesia could be removing the pain itself, like it could be an analgesic. But if that's the case, then what's good about the analgesic is that it takes away the pain, but not that it takes away the consciousness. So I think that if a person had uh, reasons to, if they could take a pill that would just remove the consciousness, or take away the pill that would remove the pain, it's better to take away the pain. The consciousness is kind of beside the point. And it's hard to see
I mean,
why on
that's
a higher
so.
view.
Yeah, you're saying that a person who just had the higher order state, who just had the conscious
Yeah,
experience of
this
pain, is better off than the person who doesn't feel anything but has the functional pain state.
That
That's
case
a
we don't consider in the
but
paper.
that's a consequence of
Um,
what you just said.
yeah, that's true. Maybe I'm inclined to think that. I have to think about that kind of case a little bit better. Yeah,
Okay,
more.
that
Yeah.
seems very strange.
yeah, and I think
Not that that's bad. I mean, I love strange things. But go ahead. Yeah.
this just makes sense, I think, in a high order view, no? Because the first order of views would say that feeling pain is a red bad. I don't need to be.
So what we argue is that this kind of view is actually independent of theories of consciousness. So we don't argue for it from the context of, in a higher order framework. We are arguing from it from the perspective that lots of theories could respect the existence of non-conscious pain. And then we argue that on different theories of welfare, it's hard to make sense of if you grant that a full-fledged pain can occur unconsciously, which again, that's a hard, tough pill for a lot of people to swallow. I think a lot of people are like, oh, well, there's functionally equivalent states, but they're not really pains. A pain is, by definition, something that's conscious. But if you take seriously the idea that a genuine person level pain can occur non-consciously, then all of our theories of welfare seem to suggest that they're bad, whether or not they're conscious.
Yeah, but I think
And that's why we
that,
don't talk about the higher order case, because the higher order case where
yeah,
the empty higher
maybe
order HUD is
maybe my
weird and
disagreement would be that they are worse if you're conscious. There is a hierarchy in the.
maybe, although even there, it depends on what the theory of consciousness says, and it's hard to see on some theories of consciousness. So think about like global workspace theory, like you might think the pain is worse because its content is like routed to more systems or something like that, and that's what's making it worse. But then what's bad about it isn't actually the consciousness, but it's the functional broader implication, that it's making you worse off at doing a whole bunch of other tasks or
But
something.
that is what the pain is according to the global workspace theory. Is that state that's globally broadcast. So that's like saying the pain has that function.
Well, what's bad is the um, global impact, not the consciousness as such, or
But
something like that.
consciousness is the global impact.
Yeah, is a global availability.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. So that
So I guess there
Yeah. This
maybe
is what I was raising as a problem. Like in the high order views, the first order state does not fix the phenomenology, so you need something else. But in the global neural workspace view, as the first order view, the broadcasting is what consciousness is.
yeah.
right. Yeah, so I guess you could conceive of some theories where the consciousness would maybe modulate the pain in such a way that it is worse in virtue of being conscious. Yeah, I guess. I can't remember what we say in the paper. It was a couple of years
Okay.
ago.
Yeah.
If you look
Well,
back and
but
see,
still, I
yeah.
mean, it's counterintuitive as you would. So these are the things that I was talking about at the beginning of this discussion. That ultimately you can always amend a view to make it compatible with what you want to say, but eventually you end up saying something that's so far removed from like what we think is the right way of thinking that you just end up in a corner somewhere. And this sounds like one of those corners where you're saying conscious pains don't matter as much as unconscious pains, or
I'm not saying they don't matter as much. They don't
well,
matter more.
they don't matter at all in a way.
Well, no, no, they
Just
matter.
the conscious pain all by
But not in
itself.
virtue of being conscious. They matter in virtue of being pains.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so that's the part that I'm thinking is the corner.
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I think like if I ask you what is it that's bad about pain, you'd say it hurts, and then I'd say, okay, what does that mean? And you'd say, it makes me not able to do these things. It makes me, and then we could debate about whether or not those functional things ground intrinsic like welfare, or whether that's just instrumentally bad for you as opposed to non-instrumentally bad. But I think that that's what the non-instrumental badness consists in, is it's having this.
So this is all a response to Bloch's claim about awfulness, isn't it? In that defunct paper, that the awfulness
well,
of pain is.
It's hanging in the background.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
But it's the general project of trying to downplay the importance of consciousness. And Claudia, you said that you don't think welfare subjectivity depends on consciousness, but that is the going view. Like
no,
I think
I'm saying that yeah, you can have other ethical consideration that is not just about consciousness, but I still think that consciousness is what matters the most. So
yeah, there's a hierarchy, she was saying, with
yeah,
that at the top.
I'm
there's a lot of people who defend the
I'm
view
on
that
board with a pluralist view that other things also matter ethically.
Yeah.
But I also have some kind of hierarchical view that consciousness would matter the most.
Yeah, well, so I'm at least happy with the idea that non-conscious states can ground welfare subjectivity. Whether or not consciousness adds anything, that I feel less confident about, but I don't know, inclined, and we argue that maybe it doesn't add anything.
Do you zombie trolley problem at all, Jake?
We do talk about the zombie trolley. We talk about zombies in there. Yeah, I feel like the discussion of zombies is unsatisfying, partially because, like for big picture methodological reasons, like I think they're inconceivable, and so I think arguing about them is kind of a waste of time. But
just like creatures like you, but without higher order states, those are zombies in effect.
Yeah, so those are non-functionally equivalent zombies.
Yeah, exactly. So those kinds of zombies, if you put them on the track and me on the other side, who
we should
say who?
I don't know who to save. I mean, how many zombies are there? Are there 5 zombies in a queue?
Infinite.
Oh, save the zombies.
Holy mackerel. Come on, man.
Yeah. But they're people too. Zombies are people too.
But I gotta matter more than all the zombies.
So is a personhood that grounds
well, because I think
moral consideration in your view. So what's grounded moral consideration in your view?
Mentality. So that's what we call the paper is called Minds Matter.
Interesting.
Because so it's like basically the view parallels like the phenomenalist type of view that says like that welfare subjectivity is grounded in consciousness. You just say everything that they say, but take out consciousness and replace it with mentality. So having thoughts and feelings and desires and hopes and fears and wonderings and so forth. And basically all theories of welfare.
Thoughts, feelings?
Yeah. Mental states.
Feelings.
So I think that a feeling, that term, as I said, pleonastically, it often refers to just the conscious version of it. But I think that
you can have an unconscious feeling.
You can have an unconscious feeling. Yeah, there's unconscious emotions, unconscious doubts.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a virtue of the way that I do things that I don't have to say things like this, and that my view is not committed to these things. And I don't think that it's a knockdown objection to your view that you have to say this stuff, but I think it is a cost to the theory to have to say stuff like that.
Well, I mean, we started by saying that one thing that's cool about a theory is it makes novel, interesting predictions and is fruitful and can be unpacked in ways that are, interesting.
Yeah.
I think these are interesting extensions. One person's, deathly terrible consequences. Another, space-time is unified and, time is a curvature.
Yes, that's a good point.
What? Okay, well, maybe it turns out. And actually, one thing I like about this is that, I think that you're often, in a wonderful way, driven by moral considerations. And I think that these kinds of considerations naturally expand the moral circle in a way that other views will struggle. So I feel like it's easy for me to accommodate non-human animals and infants mattering in a way that I think other views, potentially struggle.
I agree, because that part I agree with. I'll often say things like, I feel bad for Roomba. Like when it gets stuck in a corner, I want to help it out of the corner. And my students always make fun of me. And I'm like, but why doesn't it matter? It does have some low-level intentional states. I don't think it has consciousness, but doesn't it in some low-level sense matter whether its intentional states are fulfilled or not? So I do kind of accept the idea that maybe non-conscious mentality is important and it can ground welfare. I think that's an important point. and I would go beyond that even, because I think the environment is important as an environment. I'm all for
I don't
it.
want to say it's necessary. It's sufficient.
Yeah. Okay. So anyway, so I think there's lots of stuff that go beyond consciousness, but I think that I gotta agree with Claudia on this, that consciousness at the top and trumps all of those things in the good sense of Trump. It overrides. Yeah, exactly. If we can still use that word in this way, it overrides those other considerations, whereby the awfulness or the suffering of a conscious agent seems to me to outweigh the non-conscious suffering of an unconscious agent, and I find that to be very counterintuitive to think. But again, I don't know so Jeff Lee has this interesting idea. I think it's kind of similar, that maybe there are states that matter just as much as phenomenal consciousness that aren't that, and maybe this is sort of in that ballpark.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And especially when you have the view of consciousness that we do, like, broadly, because we like agree about a tremendous amount, like, why would having this pointer state to the states that are making the person, struggle in all sorts of ways, why does that add so much moral weight? You know what I mean? It's just hard to see.
Because it makes it feel like something.
Well,
it makes it matter. I mean, it's gotta.
Well, that's just, that's a little question begging. Like, I mean, what about it? And I think, again, it doesn't make it feel some way. It makes it consciously feel some way. And all it means to say that it consciously feels some way is just that you're aware that it's, happening. And I just don't know what the awareness is doing in terms of the mattering. It seems like it's the state that you're aware that yourself is that you're aware of yourself as being in. That's the problem. That's the problem state. That's the thing we want to avoid or give you. You want the person to have achievements and feelings of love and friendships and so forth. Whether they're aware of themselves as having the pleasure, aware of themselves as having the achievement, it's hard to see what that's adding.
So you're going to sign up for the non-experienced machine.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm going to hook you up to the machine. It's going to give you all the non-conscious mental states as of achieving all your hopes and dreams, but you won't consciously experience any of them. And you're going to say it's just as good. You're going to sign up for the. You're going to go into the non-experienced machine.
Well, I thought we say no to the machine. Isn't that we don't we want authenticity?
I'm just saying.
If we're being forced into one machine or the other.
The non-experienced machine seems worse than the experienced machine.
Yeah, I mean that's a case that we talk about in the paper.
Oh, gee, I guess I got to read this paper.
Yeah. So like we don't talk about it in the machine. We talk about it. This is a case. Declan Smithies gave us this idea, which is like, yeah, I mean, like, what's bad about taking a pill that just like turns off the consciousness? Would take a phenomenal anesthesia. Yeah, I think that's a tricky case, and it does seem like it's a bullet I have to bite, but I'm not sure that I mind it so much.
Okay. Well, you can have your breakfast of bullets, and we will be appreciative. It is 3 o'clock, so we do kind of have to wrap up. But Claudia, did you have a final comment you wanted to make, a last word?
Yes, I can. So my last word is read the book. Is fascinating, and I think it. I think it put the high order. It's a new orientation for high order views. And I think frame the discussion, all the back and forth between you and Jake was really interesting, because you're trying to come with a new proposal, like that push the view different from the traditional view and more friendly with empirical findings. Like I think one challenge for the traditional views would be how to accommodate empirical findings and how to accommodate those cases like the infant case and maybe the no human animal case. So so my final words is just like read the book.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And your comments, greatly valued. I really appreciate that. So this has been a great discussion. Just hang out for 1 second and I'll say bye off the air. But other than that, thanks again.